You are standing at the edge of the world, where the sun has just dipped below the horizon for what will be the last time in many weeks. The sky above you holds onto a thin band of indigo light, a memory of day that will fade slowly over the coming hours, replaced by the deep blue-black of polar night. The air around you is so cold it seems to hum, a high, thin note that exists somewhere between sound and sensation. You can feel it in your teeth, in the bones of your face, in the tender skin at the corners of your eyes. This is the threshold moment, the turning point in the year when the people around you, your people, must prepare not just for darkness, but for a kind of time that exists outside the ordinary rhythms of human life. You have lived through this before, of course. You were born into it, as were your parents and their parents before them, stretching back through generations whose names you know by heart, recited on long nights exactly like the ones that are coming. But each year, this moment feels new. Each year, there is a catch in your breath as you watch the last silver edge of sun slip away, leaving only the reflected glow on the ice, the snow, the low clouds that hang over the frozen sea. You are standing on the sea ice now, though it is hard to tell where the land ends and the water begins. Everything is white or gray, or the particular shade of blue that exists only in this place, in this season. The wind moves across the surface in visible waves, picking up loose snow and carrying it in sheets that rise and fall like breath. Behind you, the camp is a collection of low, dark shapes against the pale expanse. The structures are made from materials drawn from the land and sea: driftwood and bone, sealskin and sinew, stones carefully placed and packed with moss and snow. Smoke rises from an opening in the nearest shelter, a thin gray thread that the wind immediately scatters. The smoke smells of burning seal oil, a rich, thick scent that speaks of warmth and light and food. You can hear voices from inside, low and murmuring, though you cannot make out the words. Someone laughs, a sound that seems impossibly warm in the cold air. A dog barks once, then falls silent. You turn back toward the horizon. The light is almost gone now, but not quite. This is the long twilight, the slow fade that can last for hours or even days, depending on where exactly you are and how far into the season you have come. The boundary is not sharp. The world does not switch from day to night like a door closing. Instead, it drains slowly, like water seeping into sand, until you realize that what little light remains is no longer coming from the sun at all, but from the stars, the moon, and sometimes, if you are lucky, if the spirits are willing, the great curtains of green and white and red that sweep across the sky, moving like living things, like breaths, like thoughts made visible. You have been preparing for this. Everyone has. The preparation is not frantic or fearful, but it is thorough, a series of tasks performed with the care that comes from knowing that mistakes in this place, in this season, are not easily forgiven. The food stores have been checked and rechecked. Meat has been cached in the permafrost, wrapped carefully and marked so it can be found even under snow. Seal oil has been rendered and stored in containers made from seal stomachs, sewn tight and nearly translucent, glowing amber when held up to the light. The lamps have been cleaned and fitted with fresh wicks made from Arctic cotton, each strand twisted by hand until it is strong enough to burn steadily for hours without crumbling. The sleeping platforms inside the shelters have been piled with furs: caribou, muskox, Arctic hare, polar bear, layered in a specific order that you learned as a child. An order that makes the difference between warmth and cold, between sleep and sleeplessness, between comfort and the long, aching chill that settles into your bones and will not leave. The others are calling you now, their voices carried on the wind. You take one more breath of the cold air, feeling it burn clean and sharp in your lungs, and then you turn and walk back toward the camp. Your footsteps make almost no sound. The snow here is hard-packed and windswept, more ice than snow, and your boots, made from sealskin, double-layered, stuffed with dried grass that you will change out each evening, grip the surface with a slight squeak at each step. You have walked on this kind of snow your entire life, and your body knows how to move across it without thinking, how to shift your weight, how to read the surface for hidden cracks or weak spots where the ice might give way. The nearest shelter is partially underground, dug into the earth and then built up with walls of stacked stone and sod, covered over with skins and more sod, and finally a thick layer of snow that acts as insulation. The entrance is a low tunnel, barely wide enough for your shoulders, designed to trap warm air inside and keep cold air out. You crouch and move into the tunnel, feeling the temperature change immediately. The cold follows you for the first few feet, and then the air grows warmer, softer, heavy with the smell of bodies and smoke and oil. The darkness in the tunnel is complete, but you do not need light. Your hands find the walls, the smooth packed earth, the slight upward slope that leads to the interior. You emerge into a space that feels impossibly warm after the cold outside, though if you could measure it with instruments, you would find it barely above freezing. But warmth is relative here, and the difference between outside and inside is the difference between life and death, between sleep and waking. The interior is lit by a single stone lamp, a shallow bowl carved from soapstone, filled with seal oil and fitted with a curved wick that burns with a steady, gentle flame. The light is soft and golden, casting long shadows that move slightly as the flame flickers. The walls seem to absorb the light, the packed earth and stone dark and textured, hung here and there with bags and tools and strips of drying meat. There are 5 others in the shelter with you. An older woman sits closest to the lamp, tending the flame with a small piece of wood, adjusting the wick so it burns evenly. She does not look up as you enter, but you know she has registered your presence. She misses nothing. Her hands are gnarled and strong, the fingers thickened at the joints from a lifetime of work in the cold, but they move with precision and grace. Next to her, a young child sleeps on the sleeping platform, bundled in furs so that only the top of a head is visible, dark hair against the pale caribou hide. A man sits near the back wall, working on a piece of carved ivory, a small knife moving slowly and deliberately over the surface. 2 women sit together, sewing, their needles flashing in the lamplight as they stitch sealskin into a garment, their hands moving in rhythm, their voices low as they talk. You take your place on the sleeping platform, removing your outer boots and setting them carefully near the entrance tunnel, where they will not freeze completely, but will stay cold enough that the snow clinging to them will not melt and soak the skins. You peel off your outer mittens, then the inner ones, flexing your fingers to bring feeling back into them. The tips of your fingers are pale, almost white, and they ache as the warmth begins to return. This is normal. This is expected. You wiggle your toes inside the grass-stuffed liners of your boots, feeling the prickle of returning circulation. The older woman finally looks at you. Her face is deeply lined, the skin dark and weathered, her eyes keen and bright. She says something, and though the words are not in a language most people would recognize today, you understand her perfectly. She is asking if the light is gone. You nod. Yes, you tell her, the sun has set. She nods in return and adjusts the lamp wick again, lowering the flame just slightly. There is no need to waste oil. The flame does not need to be large to give enough light for the work, and the heat it provides is small but precious. This is the beginning of the time when sleep becomes something different. In the summer months, when the sun never sets, sleep is fractured and strange, stolen in bright daylight, always partial, always interrupted by light. But now, in the polar night, sleep will stretch and deepen, will become the central organizing fact of life. Not because the darkness makes you tired, exactly, but because there is so little to do, and because the cold is relentless, and because the body, when it is warm and fed and lying still beneath layers of fur, wants nothing more than to rest. But sleep in the polar night is not the same as sleep in other places, in other times. It is not 8 hours of darkness followed by waking. It is not even the same from one night to the next. It becomes something fluid, something that ebbs and flows like the tide, like the breath of the community. You will sleep when you are tired. You will wake when you are rested, or when the cold penetrates the furs and wakes you, or when hunger pulls you up out of dreams. You will eat and talk and do small tasks by lamplight, and then you will sleep again. The cycle repeats, but it is not tied to the sun. There is no sun. Time becomes something you measure by the rhythm of your own body, by the collective rhythm of the people around you. The 2 women finish the seam they are working on and set the garment aside. One of them reaches for a water skin, drinks, passes it to the other. The water is cold but not frozen, kept liquid by being stored inside the shelter, close to the warmth of bodies. You accept the skin when it is passed to you and drink. The water tastes clean and mineral, drawn from a source you know well, a place where a stream runs even in winter, kept liquid by some quirk of geology, some underground heat that never quite fades. The man with the ivory carving holds it up to the light, examining his work. He is making a small figure, an animal of some kind, though it is not yet clear what kind. The lines are simple and flowing, capturing movement and essence rather than detail. This is not idle work. The carvings have meaning, purpose. They are gifts for the spirits, markers of respect, records of events. When this one is finished, it may be placed at a hunting site, or worn as an amulet, or traded with another family from another camp when the light returns and travel becomes possible again. You lie back on the sleeping platform, pulling furs over yourself. The platform is raised off the ground, built from driftwood and bone, covered with willow branches and then layers of hide. The elevation matters. Cold air sinks, and even the small distance between the ground and the platform makes a difference. The furs are heavy and slightly scratchy, but they trap heat with astonishing efficiency. You can feel your body warmth beginning to build beneath them, creating a microclimate, a small pocket of air that will stay warm as long as you stay still. The older woman begins to hum, a low, rhythmic sound that might be a song or might just be a tuneless expression of contentment. The child stirs slightly but does not wake. The man sets down his carving and stretches, his joints cracking softly. One of the women yawns, covering her mouth with the back of her hand. The lamp flame flickers, steadies, burns on. Outside, the wind picks up. You can hear it now, a low moan that vibrates through the walls of the shelter. The structure shudders slightly, but it holds. It has held for years, and it will hold for years more, barring some catastrophic storm. The snow piled on the roof adds weight and insulation, and the low, half-buried design means the wind mostly passes over the top, rather than slamming into a vertical surface. The entrance tunnel, angled and narrow, prevents drafts. The air inside the shelter is still, almost stuffy, thick with the scent of oil and smoke and bodies. This is safety. This is warmth. This is the result of countless generations of accumulated knowledge, passed down through teaching and practice and story. The people who built this place, who designed these structures and this way of life, understood cold in a way that few people in the world could ever understand. They knew that you cannot fight the cold directly. You cannot overpower it. You can only work with it, around it, using every material and every technique at your disposal to create small, protected spaces where human life can continue. And sleep, in this context, is not a luxury or an escape. It is a tool. It is a strategy. It is how you survive the long night. By sleeping, you reduce the number of calories you need. You lower your body temperature slightly, conserving energy. You escape, for hours at a time, the psychological weight of the darkness, the endless dark that presses down on the mind as much as the cold presses against the body. You dream, and in dreams there is light. There is summer. There is the memory of the sun on your face, the smell of tundra flowers, the sound of rivers running. You close your eyes, though it makes almost no difference. The lamplight is dim enough that the darkness behind your eyelids is only slightly deeper than the darkness of the room. You can still see the faint orange glow through your lids, the way you can see the sun through closed eyes on a bright summer day, though this is gentler, softer. Your breathing slows. Your heartbeat, which has been elevated from the walk back to camp from the cold, from the small exertion of moving through the tunnel, begins to settle into a resting rhythm. Around you, the others are settling as well. You hear the rustle of furs, the soft sounds of bodies shifting into comfortable positions. Someone murmurs something, and someone else replies, the words too low to make out. The older woman stops humming. The silence that follows is not complete. There is still the wind outside, the creak of the structure, the faint hiss of the lamp. But it is a kind of silence nonetheless, a quietness that wraps around you like the furs, like the darkness, like the knowledge that everyone around you is doing the same thing, preparing for sleep, preparing to let go of waking for a while. You think about the sun, now far below the horizon, traveling its invisible path through the underworld, through the realm of ice and spirits and deep time. You think about how it will return, eventually. It always returns. The darkness is not forever, even though in the middle of it, it can feel that way. The people who came before you knew this, and they left markers, stories, ways of tracking time even when the sky gives no clues. They watched the stars and the moon. They noted the direction of the wind, the behavior of animals, the subtle changes in the ice. They counted days by notching sticks, by tying knots in cords, by memory. But for now, for tonight, the counting does not matter. What matters is the warmth, the safety, the furs, the lamp, the people around you. What matters is the slow descent into sleep, the way your thoughts begin to drift and scatter, the way the boundary between waking and dreaming starts to blur. You are not afraid of the darkness. You were raised in it, and it is as familiar to you as the light. You know its textures and its moods. You know the way it changes over the course of the night, the way the quality of blackness shifts when the moon rises, when the aurora comes, when clouds move across the sky. You know the sounds of the polar night, the crack of ice contracting in the cold, the distant howl of a wolf, the sudden sharp snap of something freezing, breaking, shifting. and you know how to sleep through it. Not in spite of it, but with it as part of it. Your sleep will be deep and long, broken occasionally by waking, by the need to adjust the furs, to add oil to the lamp, to eat a small piece of dried meat or frozen fish. And then you will sleep again, sinking back into the warmth and the darkness as easily as a seal slips into water. This is the rhythm. This is the way. The lamp flame flickers once more, casting a brief, dancing shadow across the wall, and then it settles. Your breathing deepens. The warmth beneath the furs is complete now, a steady, even heat that soaks into your muscles, into your bones. Your last waking thought is of the sun, somewhere far away, and of the promise that it will return, that the light will come back, that this darkness is not the end but only a passage, a long, slow breath between one season and the next. And then you are asleep, and the polar night holds you gently in its cold, dark hands. You have learned to read the light before it arrives, before the sun even considers breaking the horizon line, back when such risings and settings still marked your days with predictable rhythm. Now, in this deepening twilight that has stretched across weeks, you find yourself remembering those earlier times with a clarity that surprises you. The memories come not as sharp interruptions, but as slow recognitions, the way your fingers recognize the weave of a familiar textile in darkness. Your people have names for 17 different qualities of snow, but they have nearly twice as many words for variations of darkness. There is the darkness of the new moon in summer, brief and warm, filled with the rustle of insects and the calls of birds that never quite sleep. There is the darkness of storm, thick and moving, pressing against your face like a living thing. And then there are the darknesses of winter, each one distinct, each one requiring its own particular form of attention and respect. The darkness you inhabit now, in what the world beyond your territory would call late October, is called a tujik, the darkness that announces the long sleep of the sun. It is not yet the deepest dark, not yet the absolute absence of light that will come in December and January, but it is the threshold darkness, the one that asks your body to begin its transformation. You feel this request in your bones, in the way your thoughts slow and deepen, in the increasing weight of your eyelids as the afternoon, though there is barely afternoon anymore, progresses into evening without ever having fully been day. You are inside the winter dwelling now, the structure your family raised in early September when the first serious cold arrived with the north wind. It is not the summer tent of caribou hide, light and easily moved, but a more permanent architecture, one designed to hold warmth and create a small universe against the enormous pressure of winter's darkness. The frame is made of driftwood, gathered over years from the river mouth where the current deposits the skeletons of trees from forests far to the south. Forests you have never seen but can imagine through the wood itself, through its grain and heft and the way it burns. Over this frame, your family has stretched and secured layers of caribou hide, the hair left on, the skins overlapping like the scales of some great protective creature. Between the outer and inner layers, you have packed dried moss and grass, creating a space of trapped air that serves as insulation. The floor is lined with willow branches, covered with more hides, and then with the sleeping firs that will be your primary landscape for much of the coming months. The entire structure is perhaps 12 feet across, low enough that you cannot quite stand upright at the center pole, intimate enough that the breath and body heat of 6 people, yourself, your parents, your 2 younger siblings, and your grandmother, can raise the interior temperature to something approaching comfort, even when the world outside reaches a cold that would kill exposed flesh in minutes. The entrance is a tunnel, built from snow blocks, that descends slightly before rising again into the dwelling space. A design that traps the cold air low and prevents it from flooding the interior every time someone enters or exits. Even now, in this threshold period, the tunnel is in place, though it will be refined and rebuilt many times as the snow deepens and the architecture of winter reveals itself more fully. Your grandmother is the one who taught you to think of winter not as an enemy to be endured, but as a particular state of being, one that requires specific knowledge and brings its own gifts. She is old now, her face deeply lined, her hands gnarled from decades of work in extreme cold, but her mind remains sharp, and her memory holds knowledge that stretches back to her own grandmother's time, creating a chain of understanding that spans more than a century. She sits now near the center of the dwelling, close to the small stone lamp that burns seal oil and provides the only light. The flame is tiny, barely larger than your thumb, but your eyes have adjusted over the weeks to perceive the world by its faint illumination. It casts her shadow large against the curved wall, and she works steadily at a task she has performed thousands of times. softening a piece of leather by chewing it, her strong jaw working methodically, her eyes half closed in concentration. You watch her for a moment, comfortable in the silence that has always existed between you. There is no need to fill the quiet with speech. Words, you have learned, are precious in winter, not to be spent carelessly. They create moisture in the air, moisture that can freeze on the inner walls of the dwelling if the temperature drops too far, creating ice that must be carefully managed. So you speak less in winter, and you choose your words with greater care, and the silence becomes not an absence but a presence, something with texture and weight. Your mother is working on the sleeping platform, rearranging the furs, checking for any thin spots that might let cold seep through during the night. She moves with the efficiency of long practice, her hands knowing without conscious thought which pelts go where, how to layer them for maximum warmth, how to tuck and smooth them so there are no gaps or ridges to disturb sleep. She hums very quietly as she works, a melody without words, one of the old songs that are meant to be felt more than heard. Your father and older brother are outside, though not far. You can hear the muffled sounds of their work. They are reinforcing the cache where the meat is stored, securing it against the polar bears that sometimes wander through, drawn by the scent of food. The cache is built high, on a platform of lashed driftwood, and it holds the results of the autumn hunt. Seal meat frozen solid. Char caught in the river before it iced over. Ptarmigan snared in willow thickets. And the precious stores of caribou from the late summer migration, each piece carefully butchered and preserved. Your younger sister, 7 years old, is drowsy in the warmth, lying on her stomach on the sleeping platform, drawing pictures in the frost that has formed on the underside of a piece of hide that serves as a window covering. She traces spirals and animal shapes, her breath creating small clouds that dissipate slowly in the still air. Soon she will sleep. The youngest among you sleep the most in winter, their bodies knowing instinctively how to conserve energy, how to let the darkness carry them. This dwelling is not your only home, nor is this existence your only life. In summer, you travel light and fast, following the caribou herds, fishing the rivers and the coast, gathering eggs from cliff-nesting birds, collecting berries and roots and the endless useful plants that appear briefly during the short, brilliant, sleepless season of light. Summer is movement and activity and the strange euphoria of exhaustion, of working for 18, 20 hours at a stretch, of drying meat and fish in the constant sun, of voices and songs and stories told while walking, while paddling, while working. But winter is different. Winter is stillness and conservation, darkness and depth. Winter is when the true skill of your people reveals itself, not in the dramatic acts of survival, but in the subtle knowledge of how to live well in conditions that seem impossible, how to maintain not just life but sanity, community, even joy, during months when the sun barely shows itself, and the cold is so severe that your breath freezes in the air and falls as ice crystals that tinkle faintly as they strike the ground. You learned early that winter survival is not primarily about brave endurance, but about understanding sleep. Sleep is the central discipline, the core practice, the fundamental adaptation that makes everything else possible. Your people sleep more in winter, much more. Not from depression or illness, but from wisdom, from the accumulated knowledge of centuries of life in this environment. In summer, you might sleep 5 or 6 hours out of every 24, driven by the urgency of the season, by all that must be accomplished before the cold returns. But in the deep of winter, you might sleep 14, 16, even 18 hours out of every cycle of rest and waking. You do not track days as distinct units anymore, not in the way you did when the sun's rising and setting marked clear boundaries. Instead, you move through a more fluid experience of time, waking when your body has rested sufficiently, engaging in necessary tasks, eating, tending the lamp, telling a story or two, and then returning to the furs as drowsiness naturally reasserts itself. Your grandmother says that sleep is how your people survived when other groups perished, back in the ancient times of great cold, times when even the sea froze solid and the seals vanished for seasons at a stretch. Those who tried to remain active as they had in summer, who fought against the darkness and the cold, exhausted themselves and their food supplies. But those who learned to sleep truly sleep, who let their bodies slow and their needs diminish, who embraced the darkness rather than resisting it, they persisted, and their children persisted, and eventually you were born into this unbroken chain of sleep wisdom. The lamp flickers slightly, and your mother reaches to adjust the wick, a twist of dried moss that draws the oil upward into the flame. The light steadies again, and in its small sphere of illumination, you can see the details of this world that will contain you for months. The tools hung on the walls in careful arrangement, each one known and valued. The cooking pot of soapstone, dark with use. The bags of supplies, sewn from seal intestine and caribou stomach, waterproof and strong. The spare clothing folded and stored. The hunting equipment your father maintains with religious attention. The sewing kit your mother keeps in a decorated case made from the skull of a small seal, scraped thin and stitched with sinew. Everything here has been made by hands you know, most of it by your own family's hands, and everything is reparable. There is nothing you cannot mend or remake if necessary, no dependence on distant supplies or unknown makers. This self-sufficiency is not just practical but psychological. It creates a sense of security, of competence, that helps ward off the darkness's pressure on the mind. Your father and brother return, entering through the tunnel in a rush of cold air that smells of snow and seal oil and the particular mineral scent of extreme cold. They brush ice crystals from their clothing and shed their outer layers, hanging them where they will dry slightly in the dwelling's relative warmth. Your father nods to your mother. The cache is secure. Your brother, who is 15 and growing into the lean strength of young manhood, grins at you briefly, a flash of connection, before settling onto the sleeping platform with an exaggerated sigh of comfort at being back inside. Your mother has been cooking, a slow process in winter, using the small flame to heat a stew of meat and fat in the soapstone pot. The smell has been building for hours, rich and nourishing, and now she indicates that it is ready. You gather around the pot, each person with a bowl carved from wood or bone, and you eat slowly, savoring the warmth as much as the taste, feeling the food's heat spread through your body, fueling the internal fire that keeps you alive. The fat is crucial, more valuable than the lean meat, because fat is dense energy, fat is insulation from within. Fat is what allows your body to maintain its core temperature when the air around you is hostile to mammalian life. Your people have always known this, have always prized the fatty parts of the seal, the rich marrow of caribou bones, the oily fish that swim in Arctic waters. You eat fat without guilt or concern, understanding it not as indulgence but as medicine, as necessity, as the substance that stands between you and the cold's patient hunger. After eating, your father tells a story. It is one you have heard before, but that does not diminish it. In winter, the familiar stories are best, the ones worn smooth by many tellings, the ones that do not demand intense attention, but instead provide a comfortable structure for the mind to rest within. He tells of a hunter who went out onto the sea ice in the dark season and was caught by a sudden storm, how he survived by building a snow shelter and letting himself sleep, trusting that his dogs would wake him if danger approached, how he dreamed of his grandfather who showed him the way home, how he woke to find the storm past and the stars bright and the way clear. The story is not dramatic in its telling. Your father's voice is low and measured, almost monotonous, designed not to excite but to soothe. The point of the story is not suspense but reassurance. The hunter survived because he knew how to rest, how to trust, how to let the darkness hold him rather than fighting it. These are the lessons woven through all the winter stories, subtle reinforcements of the attitudes and practices that keep your people alive and sane. When the story ends, there is a long, comfortable silence. Your sister has fallen asleep, curled against your mother. Your grandmother has put aside her work and is lying down, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and deep. Your brother is drowsy, fighting it for a moment, then surrendering, shifting into a more comfortable position and letting himself drift. You feel the heaviness in your own limbs, the pleasant weight of sleepiness settling over you like an additional fur. Outside, the wind has picked up slightly, a low moan that is almost musical, and you can hear the occasional crack and groan of the sea ice in the distance, the enormous frozen expanse adjusting to temperature shifts and tidal pressures beneath its surface. Your mother adjusts the lamp, lowering the flame to its smallest sustainable size, enough to keep it burning but not so much that it wastes precious fuel. The light diminishes to barely more than a glow, and the darkness in the dwelling deepens, becoming almost absolute except for that single point of warmth and illumination. You arrange yourself on the sleeping platform, fitting your body into the familiar depression you have created over the weeks, pulling the furs up and around you, feeling their weight and softness, their smell of smoke and animal and family. The platform holds 6 people when everyone is sleeping, arranged efficiently like fingers in a mitten, each person's warmth contributing to the collective heat, no space wasted. This communal sleeping is not uncomfortable. You have never known true privacy in the way that people from warmer climates experience it. Never had a room of your own. Never slept completely alone. The presence of others is safety and warmth, and you would feel more alarmed by isolation than by proximity. You know the breathing patterns of each family member, can identify who is who by the sound and rhythm of their sleep, can sense in your own sleep if someone is restless or unwell. Your grandmother once told you that before you are born, you sleep in the darkness of your mother's body, held and warm and without need, and that the winter sleep is a return to that original state, a remembering of what it is to be completely safe, completely at rest. You think about this as you drift, the thought itself becoming dreamlike, your consciousness beginning to loosen its grip on the waking world. The darkness is complete now, or nearly so, the lamps flame so low that it provides no real illumination, existing more as a promise than as a light. A promise that fire still exists, that warmth still exists, that morning, however it manifests in this sunless season, will come again. You can hear your father's breathing deepen and slow into the pattern of sleep. Your mother shifts slightly, settling. Your brother mutters something unintelligible, a fragment of dream speech. Your grandmother is so still she barely seems present, her sleep the profound rest of the very old, who have crossed into and back from this darkness so many times that it holds no fear, only familiarity. You let yourself sink, feeling the platform beneath you, the furs around you, the warmth of bodies near but not touching, the almost imperceptible movement of air as people breathe, the deep silence beneath the wind's song outside. You sink into sleep the way you would sink into deep water, without resistance, trusting the medium to hold you, knowing that you will rise again when the time is right, but that for now, for these hours or many hours, you can let go completely. This is the skill, the true Arctic adaptation, the ability to surrender to sleep without fear, to let consciousness go, to trust the darkness. In other places, in other climates, people fear too much sleep, associate it with laziness or depression or death. But here, sleep is life. Sleep is how you conserve your body's fuel, how you reduce your food requirements, how you rest your mind against the psychological weight of the long dark, how you pass the time when there is nothing to be done, when the storms rage and the cold is absolute, and the world outside your small shelter is utterly hostile to human activity. In sleep, you travel to other places. Your dreams in winter are vivid, more real sometimes than waking, filled with light and color, and the faces of people who have died but remain present in memory and story. You dream of summer, of the sun at midnight, of walking for hours across the tundra with your family, of the taste of fresh berries and the sound of river water, and the sight of caribou herds moving like rivers themselves across the land. Your grandmother says these dreams are not just memory but sustenance, that the mind in winter draws on stored light the way the body draws on stored fat, that the dreams keep you balanced and human, prevent the darkness from seeping too deep into your spirit. She says that people who cannot dream properly in winter, who fight their sleep or fear it, sometimes become lost, become prey to the darkness sickness that makes them sad and strange and dangerous to themselves. But you are not sick. You are deeply, profoundly well in a way that people from outside would not recognize as wellness. You are adapted, evolved, trained from birth in the practices that make this life possible. You are part of an unbroken chain of successful sleepers, of people who learn to rest in darkness, and that knowledge is in your bones, in your blood, in the very structure of your nervous system. You sleep, and while you sleep, your body performs its miracles. Your heart rate slows, reducing the demand for fuel. Your metabolism shifts, burning fat with extreme efficiency, generating steady heat without waste. Your breathing deepens, becomes more efficient, extracting every possible molecule of oxygen from each breath. Your digestive system slows, making the most of every bit of food, wasting nothing. And your mind, freed from the demands of sensory processing and decision-making, drifts through landscapes of memory and imagination, consolidating learning, processing emotions, maintaining the psychological structures that make you who you are. You dream of your grandfather, who died 2 winters ago, who appears in your sleep as he was in his prime, strong and laughing, teaching you to read the ice, to understand the different colors and textures that indicate safety or danger. You dream of seals surfacing in open water, their eyes bright and intelligent, unafraid. The hours pass, uncounted and uncountable. In the world outside, the darkness persists, absolute or nearly so, the sun making at best a brief, dim appearance on the southern horizon before sliding away again, if it appears at all. The stars will overhead in their slow arcs, the constellations your people have named and navigated by for longer than anyone can remember. The aurora sometimes flickers into life, green and white, and occasionally red curtains of light that ripple across the sky, silent and strange and beautiful, caused by something your grandmother calls sky spirits, and your father calls something about the sun's wind hitting the earth's shield. Two explanations that do not contradict each other in your understanding. The cold intensifies and relaxes, following patterns that are not quite predictable, but not quite random either. Your father, when he is awake, monitors these patterns constantly, listening to the wind, checking the smoke hole, reading the feel of the air. He knows when it is safe to go out for a short time, and when it would be fatal, when the cold is merely dangerous and when it is absolute. But mostly, during these deep winter periods, you do not go out. You stay inside the dwelling, in your small world of warmth and semi-darkness, and you let the time pass in rhythms of sleep and waking that have nothing to do with clocks or schedules or the artificial demands of civilization. You live according to the body's wisdom, the old mammalian knowledge that knows how to hibernate, how to wait, how to persist through the impossible season. You wake before the others, or perhaps you do not wake at all but simply emerge from one layer of consciousness into another. The boundary between sleep and waking grown so thin in the constant dimness that you can no longer say with certainty where one ends and the other begins. The air inside the shelter carries the familiar weight of many bodies breathing in unison, a rhythm you have learned to find comfort in, though it is not the comfort of your former life. It is something older, something that asks nothing of you but that you continue, breath after breath, through the long darkness. Your grandmother lies near the center, where the warmth gathers most reliably. You can hear the particular quality of her breathing, slower than the others, deeper, as though she draws not merely air but something more essential from the smoke-touched atmosphere. She has told you that sleep in the polar night is not the same as sleep in summer, that the body learns a different architecture of rest when the sun abandons the sky. In summer, sleep comes in quick, necessary bursts between the endless tasks of hunting and gathering, preparing and moving. But in winter, sleep becomes a dwelling place, a second home within the home, and you must learn to inhabit it as skillfully as you inhabit your tent of hide and bone. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the furs that have taken hours to warm with your body's heat. The cold waits just beyond the layered skins, patient and absolute, ready to reclaim any warmth that strays beyond the careful boundaries your people have constructed. You have learned that temperature is not merely a condition but a presence, something with intention and memory, and that to survive the polar night you must negotiate with it constantly, offering small surrenders, a fingertip grown numb, a cheek touched by frost, in exchange for the preservation of your core, the essential warmth that keeps the darkness from entering your body entirely. The others begin to stir, though no one rises quickly. There is an art to waking in winter, a gradual gathering of will and warmth that cannot be rushed. Your cousin's child whimpers softly in sleep, and you hear the mother's hand find the child in the darkness, a touch that says, "I am here. We are safe. Sleep now," without the need for words. Language itself seems to change in the polar night, becoming more about breath and touch, and the small sounds that confirm presence without demanding full wakefulness. Your uncle moves near the entrance, tending the small fire that has burned through the night. He feeds it carefully, each piece of fuel considered and placed with precision. Fire in winter is not the generous thing it is in autumn, when wood can be used freely and flames can leap high. Now every twist of dried willow, every piece of seal blubber, every scrap of fat-soaked moss must be rationed against the weeks and months still to come. The fire is kept small, barely more than embers with occasional small flames, enough to keep the air breathable and to provide a focal point for warmth, but not enough to consume your stores too quickly. He glances at you and nods, a small acknowledgement that you are awake, that you have survived another cycle of sleep in the long night. There is satisfaction in this simple exchange, though satisfaction is perhaps too large a word for the quiet recognition that passes between you. It is more like a confirmation, a marking of continuance. You are here. The darkness has not claimed you. The cold has not entered too deeply. These facts are enough. You think of your first winter in the far north, when the darkness was still new to you and sleep felt like a kind of death you were unsure you would return from. You would force yourself to stay awake as long as possible, fighting the drowsiness that came over you, fearing that if you closed your eyes in that absolute darkness, you might never open them again. Your grandmother had watched your struggle for several days before she finally spoke to you about it, her words coming slowly, chosen with care. She told you that fear of sleep in the polar night is common among those who have not yet learned to trust the darkness. She said that in her grandmother's time, there were songs specifically for teaching children how to surrender to winter sleep. Songs that described it not as a small death, but as a journey to a place where the ancestors waited, where warmth was remembered, where the sun existed in memory even when it could not be seen. She sang one of these songs for you, her voice barely above a whisper in the dim interior of the shelter, and though you could not understand all the old words, you felt something shift in your chest, some tight knot of fear loosening just slightly. That night, you had slept more easily, and each night afterward became a little less frightening, until finally sleep in darkness became as natural as sleep had once been in light, though different in texture and quality. You learned that your body possesses wisdom your conscious mind does not, that it knows how to slow and rest and conserve even when your thoughts race with anxiety. You learned to trust the furs and the closeness of other bodies and the small sounds of the shelter settling around you. You learned that darkness is not the absence of light, but a presence in itself, something that can be inhabited and even, in its own strange way, befriended. Now, several winters into your new life, you find that you dream differently in the polar night than you did in the world of sun and season. Your dreams are longer, more intricate, filled with detail and sensation that you can sometimes remember upon waking. Your grandmother says this too is normal, that the dreaming mind expands in winter to fill the space left by the reduced world of waking. She says that dreams in the polar night are important, that they carry messages and knowledge, that the ancestors speak more clearly when the outer world grows quiet and dark. You have dreamed in recent nights of summer. Not the summer you knew before you came north, but the brief, intense summer of the Arctic, which you have now experienced twice. In your dreams, the sun circles the sky without setting, and the tundra erupts in a sudden excess of life. Flowers so small and bright they seem like colored snow, birds arriving in enormous flocks, the ice breaking and retreating, revealing dark water that moves and breathes like a living thing. In your dreams, you are running across the open land, your feet striking ground that yields slightly, cushioned with moss and lichen, and the air is warm enough that you do not need to cover your face, and the light is everywhere, inescapable, glorious, exhausting. You wake from these dreams with a feeling that is both wonderful and painful, a longing for the sun that you have learned all winter people carry in their bodies like a seed that waits for the right conditions to grow. Your grandmother has told you that this longing is good, that it keeps you connected to the future, to the certainty that the sun will return even though in the depths of winter this seems impossible. She says that people who lose the ability to long for summer are in danger, that they have let the darkness become too complete, and that the community must watch such people carefully, keep them close, remind them through touch and story and small rituals that the world is cyclical, that what is gone will come again. Outside, you hear the wind picking up, a sound that is different from the wind you knew before you came north. Arctic wind does not simply blow. It scours, it penetrates, it finds every gap and weakness in your shelter and tests it methodically. You have learned to read the wind's voice, to distinguish between the relatively mild winds that bring weather change and the fierce winds that precede true storms. The ones that can last for days and make it impossible to venture more than a few steps from shelter without risking disorientation and death. This morning's wind sounds steady, but not yet dangerous. Your uncle listens to it for a moment, his head tilted slightly, then nods to himself. He will go out soon to check the cache, to see whether the stored meat is still secure, whether any animals have tried to raid your supplies during the night. This is part of the daily rhythm of winter life. These small ventures out into the cold, brief and purposeful, followed by long periods of stillness inside the shelter. You watch as he begins the careful process of dressing for the outside. This is not the simple act it would be in a milder climate. Each layer must be put on in the correct order, each tie secured properly, each opening carefully managed. He starts with the inner layer of soft caribou skin, worn with the fur against his body. Over this goes another layer, the fur facing outward this time, and then the outer garments of seal skin, which resist wind and moisture better than any other material your people know. He wraps his face carefully, leaving only a small opening for his eyes, and pulls the hood close around this wrapping. He checks his mittens, feeling for any thin places in the fur, any gaps in the seams that might let cold penetrate. Finally, he prepares himself mentally. You can see it in the way he stands for a moment, breathing deliberately, gathering his focus. Then he opens the entrance, a complex maneuver involving several flaps and a crawl through a low passage designed to prevent direct wind from entering the main space. And the cold comes in like a living thing, a shocking presence that makes everyone draw their furs more tightly around themselves. He disappears into the dimness outside, and someone quickly rearranges the entrance behind him, minimizing the intrusion of cold air. Now there is only waiting. These times when someone is outside always carry a small weight of anxiety, though no one speaks of it directly. The cold is too powerful, too absolute. Things can go wrong quickly. A mitten can be lost, a hand exposed to frostbite. Wind can rise suddenly, creating a whiteout that makes it impossible to find the shelter again, even if it is only a few yards away. Ice can be weaker than it appears. An animal encountered unexpectedly can be dangerous, especially in winter when everything is hungry and desperate. But your uncle is experienced, careful, and he is only going to the cache, which is close and along a route he has traveled many times. Still, you find yourself listening, tracking his progress by the small sounds that occasionally reach you through the shelter's walls. The crunch of snow under his feet, a grunt of effort as he moves something heavy, the brief howl of wind when he opens the cache's protective cover. Your grandmother begins to hum quietly, and you recognize the melody as one of the songs that is meant to protect travelers, even those who travel only a short distance. Others join her, a low collective sound that fills the space with something that is not quite music and not quite prayer, but something between the two, something that has its own power. You add your voice to theirs, finding the harmony that fits your range, and for a few minutes the shelter becomes a single breathing, humming organism, bound together by sound and intention. Then your uncle returns, bringing with him another wave of cold and also the dark, rich smell of frozen meat. He sheds his outer layers methodically, hanging them carefully so they will dry of any frost before he needs to wear them again. His face, once the wrapping is removed, shows the red marks of cold, but his eyes are clear and satisfied. The cache is secure. The supplies are holding. All is well enough. Someone begins to prepare food, though the morning meal in winter is a modest thing, barely more than a few pieces of frozen meat softened briefly near the fire, some fat to chew, a few sips of water melted from snow. You eat slowly, making the food last, letting each small piece warm in your mouth before swallowing. Your body has learned to need less in winter, to burn its fuel more slowly, to find satisfaction in amounts that would have left you hungry in the busy months of summer and fall. After eating, the day stretches out before you, largely undifferentiated, a long space of time that must be filled with small tasks and carefully managed rest. This is perhaps the greatest challenge of the polar night. Not the cold, not the darkness, but the emptiness of time, the way hours seem to lose their meaning when there is no sun to mark their passage, when one day flows into the next without clear boundaries. Your people have developed many strategies for managing this challenge. There are stories, endless stories, repeated and varied and embellished. Your grandmother is one of the best storytellers, and she can make a single tale last for hours, drawing out every detail, following every side path, creating such a complete world in words that you forget, for a time, the smallness of your actual surroundings. There are games involving small carved pieces and careful movements, games that require strategy and patience. There are crafts, the constant work of repairing clothing, making new tools, preparing sinew and hide for future use. There are songs and quiet conversations. There are periods of deliberate rest that are not quite sleep, but a kind of deep stillness, a conscious slowing that conserves energy and helps the time pass. And there is the watching of the fire, which is perhaps the most ancient way of passing time, older than any other human invention. You find yourself doing this often, letting your gaze rest on the small flames, watching the way they move and change, the patterns they make in the embers. The fire seems to contain all the colors that have disappeared from the world outside, gold and orange and red, and even, in the hottest parts, a blue so pale it is almost white. Staring into the fire, you can almost believe in warmth as an absolute, as something that can triumph over cold, though you know this is an illusion, that the fire exists only because of your constant attention and feeding, that it could be extinguished in moments if you stop protecting it. Your younger cousin sits beside you, working on a piece of carving. She is making a small figure from a piece of bone, using a blade that has been sharpened so many times it is barely wider than a thick hair. The work requires intense concentration and perfect control, and she bends close to it, her breath occasionally clouding in the cool air despite the fire. You watch her hands, noticing the sureness of her movements, the way she seems to know exactly where to cut, how much pressure to apply. She has a gift for this work, your grandmother says, a gift that showed itself even when she was very small, and now she creates figures that are beautiful and also useful, small enough to carry but detailed enough to serve as representations in important ceremonies. She is making a seal, you can see now, capturing the particular curve of its body, the smoothness of its form in the water. Seals are sacred to your people, givers of life, providers of food and fuel and material for clothing and shelter. To carve a seal is to honor it, to acknowledge the relationship between hunter and hunted, to recognize that you survive because the seal allows itself to be caught, that this is a gift that must be received with proper respect and gratitude. Your grandmother begins to tell a story about seals, about the old times when people and animals could speak to each other directly, when the boundaries between different kinds of beings were more fluid than they are now. She speaks of a woman who married a seal and lived with him in the ocean, learning the secrets of the underwater world, and who eventually returned to her people bringing knowledge of where the seals could be found and how they wished to be hunted. The story is long and complex, with many verses that must be recited in exactly the correct way, and your grandmother's voice rises and falls with the rhythm of it, carrying everyone deeper into the narrative until the shelter seems to fade and you are there, in that ancient time, watching the woman descend into the dark water, feeling the shock of cold, and then the strange warmth that comes from being welcomed into the seal's realm. When the story ends, there is a long silence. No one moves or speaks. The fire whispers to itself. Outside, the wind continues its endless conversation with the snow. Your cousin's blade catches the firelight and flashes briefly as she makes another careful cut. Someone shifts in their furs, settling into a more comfortable position. A baby makes a small sound, not quite waking, and is immediately soothed by a mother's touch. This is time in the polar night, slow, measured in breaths and small gestures, in stories that have been told for generations and will be told for generations more. This is how your people survive, not just the physical challenge of the darkness, but the psychological weight of it, the way it presses on the mind, the way it can make you forget that any other kind of existence is possible. Through story and craft and carefully maintained routine, through the deliberate creation of meaning in the midst of what could seem like meaningless endurance, your people transform survival into something more than mere continuation. They transform it into a kind of art. You close your eyes for a moment, not sleeping but resting, letting the sounds of the shelter wash over you. The breathing, the small movements, the crackle of the fire, your grandmother's voice now speaking softly to someone about tomorrow's tasks, your cousin's scraping blade, the wind's patient assault on the world outside. These sounds create a kind of music, a composition that is different every moment, but also always familiar, always recognizable as the particular music of your people living through the polar night. You think about sleep, about the question that brought you to this life in the first place. How do people sleep through the endless darkness? And you realize that the question itself was shaped by assumptions you no longer hold, that it imagined sleep as a distinct and separate state, something you enter and exit cleanly. But you have learned that sleep in the polar night is something more fluid, more integrated with waking life. You have learned that your people do not so much sleep through the darkness as inhabited in multiple states of consciousness, moving between full wakefulness and deep sleep with many gradations in between, each serving its purpose, each necessary for survival. You have learned that sleep here is communal, that you rest better when you are surrounded by others, that the sound of their breathing and the warmth of their bodies creates a kind of safety that allows for true rest. You have learned that sleep is protected by ritual and story, by the songs that are sung before lying down and the careful arrangement of furs and the tending of the fire. You have learned that sleep is respected, that no one wakes another unnecessarily, that the hours of rest are seen as sacred time when the boundary between this world and the spirit world grows thin, when dreams carry important messages, when the body repairs itself for the next cycle of endurance. And you have learned that sleep is not escape but continuation, that even in your deepest rest you remain connected to the community, to the shelter, to the long project of surviving until the sun returns. Your sleeping body still breathes the smoke-touched air, still maintains its core warmth through the night, still responds to changes in temperature or unusual sounds. Sleep here is not unconsciousness, but a different kind of consciousness, one that is older and wiser than your waking mind, one that knows how to navigate darkness and cold with an instinct that precedes language and thought. The day continues its slow progression, marked not by the sun's movement, which does not exist, but by the rhythm of small tasks and rest periods, by the gradual consumption of the day's allotted fuel, by the collective sense of time passing that the community maintains through shared agreement. You work on repairing a tear in your boot, using a curved needle made from bone and thread made from sinew, each stitch placed carefully to ensure both strength and flexibility. The work is meditative, requiring just enough attention to keep your mind occupied, but not so much that you cannot also listen to the conversations around you, to the continuing stories, to the small sounds of everyone else engaged in their own tasks. Your grandmother tells you that this is her favorite part of winter, these long days of small work and community, when there is time to teach and learn, when the urgent demands of survival become routine enough that there is space for thought and conversation. She says that the great ideas of your people have often come during the polar night, when there is time to think deeply about problems, to consider and reconsider, to develop new techniques and technologies through long reflection and experimentation. She says that the summer is for action and the winter is for thought, and that both are necessary for a full life. But she also says that winter extracts a price for this gift of time, that not everyone bears the darkness equally well, that each year there are people who struggle more than others, who grow quiet and withdrawn, who lose their appetite for food and conversation, who sleep too much or cannot sleep at all. She says that the community must watch for these signs, must pay attention to those who are struggling, must draw them back into the collective life through gentle insistence, through small tasks that reconnect them to purpose, through touch and presence and the steady reminder that the darkness will end, that it always ends, that the sun will return as it has returned every year since the world began. You think about this, about the ones who struggle, and you realize that you have been one of them at times, that there have been periods during each winter when the darkness seemed too heavy, when you woke with a weight on your chest that had nothing to do with the furs covering you, when the thought of continuing through another cycle of dim waking and heavy sleep seemed impossible. But each time someone noticed. Your grandmother, usually, but sometimes others. They would sit beside you and tell a story, or give you a task that needed your particular skills, or simply place a hand on your shoulder and breathe with you for a while. And somehow this was enough, these small interventions, these reminders that you were not alone in the darkness, that you were part of something larger than your own struggle. This, you have come to understand, is the true answer to the question of how Arctic nomads sleep through endless polar nights. They do it together. They do it through the structures of community and ritual. They do it by transforming the darkness from an enemy to be fought into a season to be inhabited, by creating meaning and purpose even in the longest nights, by protecting and being protected, by remembering and being remembered, by telling and retelling the stories that connect them to the past and the future, to the times of light that have been and will be again. The fire burns lower, and your uncle adds fuel carefully, measuring out what can be spared, keeping the balance between warmth and conservation. The day, such as it is, moves toward its center, though the light outside the shelter does not change, remains the same deep twilight that passes for day in the heart of winter. You finish repairing your boot and hold it up to examine your work, satisfied with the neat row of stitches, with the way the repair strengthens rather than merely patches. Your cousin finishes her seal carving and passes it around for everyone to admire, and there is quiet praise for her skill, for the way she has captured the essence of the animal in such a small form. Your grandmother announces that she is tired and will rest for a while, and others follow her example, arranging themselves in their sleeping places, pulling the furs close, finding the particular position that brings comfort. You are not sleepy yet, but you lie down anyway, knowing that rest is valuable even without sleep, that lying still conserves energy and warmth. You close your eyes and listen to the shelter settling into its rest time quiet, the conversations fading to silence, the movements becoming still. And in this stillness, in this deliberate pause in the flow of the day, you find yourself thinking about all the others who have done this same thing, who have lain down in darkness in the far north, who have pulled furs around themselves and waited for sleep to come, who have survived the polar night through patience and community and the simple determination to continue. You think about the ancestors your grandmother speaks of, the ones who first learned to live in this extreme place, who figured out through trial and error how to make clothing warm enough, how to build shelters secure enough, how to hunt and store and ration, how to maintain hope and sanity through months without sun. You think about all those who will come after you, the children being born even now into this winter darkness, who will grow up learning these same skills, who will lie down in their own time under their own furs and find the same complicated peace that you have found, the same accommodation with cold and darkness, the same trust in the cyclical nature of the world, in the certainty that what is gone will come again. You wake in the middle of what you have come to recognize as true night, though the sky beyond the smoke hole offers no confirmation, no subtle shift from charcoal to ink that might anchor you in time. The darkness inside the tent is complete, a living thing that presses against your eyelids even when they are open, and for a moment you cannot remember if you have been asleep for hours or only minutes. Your breath hangs visible in the cold air above your face, a ghostly presence that dissolves back into the greater darkness, and you realize that the fire has burned down to almost nothing, just a faint pulse of red ember light at the center of the stone circle. The temperature has dropped. You can feel it in the way the reindeer hides have stiffened slightly against your body, in the tightness of the skin across your cheeks and forehead, in the small ache that has begun to settle into your joints. You do not move yet. Instead, you lie perfectly still, listening to the tent around you, to the soft breathing of the others, to the occasional creak of the wooden frame as it contracts in the deepening cold, to the wind that has picked up outside, pushing against the hide walls with a low, persistent voice that speaks in a language older than words. Somewhere in the darkness, someone else is awake. You can sense it rather than hear it, a quality of attention that differs from the loose emptiness of sleep, a consciousness that moves through the space like a second wind. After a long moment, you hear the faint rustle of fur being pushed aside, the careful whisper of bare feet on frozen ground, and then the small, bright sound of a stick being fed into the embers. Light blooms slowly, reluctantly, casting trembling shadows up the curved walls of the tent, and you see Nico crouched by the fire, his face illuminated from below, his eyes distant and thoughtful as he watches the new flame take hold. He does not look at you, though you suspect he knows you are awake. He simply tends the fire with the practiced economy of movement that characterizes everything he does, adding fuel piece by piece, coaxing the warmth back into being without rushing it, without forcing it. The firelight catches in his silver hair, turns his weathered skin to amber and bronze, deepens the lines around his eyes into canyons of shadow. He looks ancient in this light, as though he has been sitting by this fire for centuries, feeding it through all the long polar nights that have ever existed, a guardian of warmth and waking in a world that threatens always to slide into permanent cold and permanent sleep. You shift slightly, letting him know with the small sound of your movement that you are conscious, that he is not alone in his vigil. He glances over, his eyes meeting yours across the growing light, and something passes between you, some acknowledgement that does not require speech, some shared understanding of what it means to be awake in this particular darkness, in this particular cold, in this suspended moment between one state and another. The wind has changed, he says quietly, his voice low enough not to disturb the others. It comes from the northeast now, from the frozen sea. This means the temperature will drop further before it rises again. You pull yourself up to sitting, drawing the reindeer hide around your shoulders, and move closer to the fire. The air away from your sleeping place is shockingly cold, and you can feel it working its way through the layers of fur and skin and wool, seeking the warmth of your body with patient insistence. By the time you settle beside Nico, your fingers are already beginning to stiffen, and you hold them out toward the flames, letting the heat work its slow way back into the joints. How long until dawn? You ask, though you know the question is almost meaningless here, where dawn is a relative concept, a subtle adjustment in the quality of darkness rather than the arrival of true light. Nico considers this, his head tilted slightly as though he is listening to something beyond the tent, beyond the wind, beyond the audible world. Perhaps 6 hours, he says finally. Perhaps 8. The days are at their shortest now. Soon they will begin to lengthen again, though so slowly you would not notice it from one sunrise to the next. You must count many days together to see the difference, to understand that the light is returning. He reaches for a small leather pouch that sits beside his sleeping place and opens it with careful fingers. Inside are strips of dried meat, dark and tough looking in the firelight, and he offers you one before taking another for himself. You accept it, bringing it to your mouth, biting down on the hard fibrous texture, letting the concentrated flavor of reindeer and salt and smoke spread across your tongue. It requires patience to eat. This food requires slow, deliberate chewing, a kind of meditation in itself, and you find yourself grateful for the distraction, for something to do with your hands and mouth while the night continues its patient unfolding around you. In the deepest part of winter, Nico says, speaking between careful bites, his words measured and unhurried, when the sun does not rise at all for many weeks, people sometimes forget how to sleep properly. They lose the rhythm of it. The darkness becomes so constant, so complete, that their bodies no longer know when to rest and when to wake. Some people become like ghosts, wandering through their days and nights without clear boundaries between the two, eating when they remember to eat, sleeping when exhaustion finally overtakes them, living in a kind of dream that never quite resolves into either waking or sleeping. You think about this, chewing slowly, feeling the meat soften gradually between your teeth. The fire crackles softly, sending small bright sparks up toward the smoke hole, and you watch them rise and fade, small lives burning themselves out in seconds. How do you prevent that, you ask? How do you keep the boundaries clear when everything outside is telling you they do not exist? Nico is quiet for a long time, and you learn to recognize this quality in his silences. The way they are not empty spaces, but rather full ones, chambers where thought moves and settles and arranges itself into understanding before being offered as speech. When he finally answers, his voice carries a weight that speaks of hard-won knowledge, of lessons learned over decades of living in this unforgiving place. You create your own boundaries, he says. You build them deliberately, with intention, the way you would build a shelter or prepare food for winter. You decide that this time is for resting, and this time is for being awake, regardless of what the sky tells you. You create rhythms through your actions, through the small, repeated ceremonies of daily life. You wake at approximately the same time each day, even when the darkness gives you no reason to wake. You prepare food at regular intervals. You tend the fire, repair your tools, tell your stories, sing your songs, all according to a pattern that you have chosen rather than one that has been imposed on you by the sun. He pauses, taking another bite of the dried meat, his jaw working steadily. Outside, the wind intensifies slightly, and you can hear the fine particles of snow being driven against the tent walls, a sound like sand being scattered across stretched skin, constant and hushed and oddly soothing in its predictability. The fire helps, Nico continues. The fire becomes like a small sun, a source of light and warmth that marks the center of your world. When you wake, you tend the fire. When you prepare to sleep, you bank the fire so that it will last through the night without going out completely. The act of tending the fire becomes a kind of clock, a way of measuring time when all other measurements have been taken from you. And the smell of the smoke, the way it fills the tent and clings to your clothes and hair, this becomes a reminder that you are alive, that you are present, that you exist as something more than a ghost wandering through eternal darkness. You nod slowly, understanding settling into your bones along with the warmth from the fire. Around you, the others continue to sleep, their breathing soft and regular, each person cocooned in their own nest of furs and skins, each dreaming their own dreams or resting in the blank emptiness that comes when exhaustion finally overtakes the mind's constant movement. Tell me about the dreams, you say after a while, your voice barely above a whisper. You spoke of them before, the strange dreams that come during the polar night. What makes them different from ordinary dreams? Nico shifts his position slightly, settling himself more comfortably on the ground, and the firelight plays across his features, creating valleys and ridges in the landscape of his face. When he speaks, his voice has changed slightly, taken on a quality that is at once more distant and more intimate, as though he is speaking from a place deeper inside himself, from some interior chamber where memory and experience are stored like precious resources against the long winter of forgetting. In the ordinary world, he begins, where the days and nights follow each other with predictable regularity, dreams come and go like visitors. They arrive in the darkness behind your closed eyes, they stay for a while, they leave with the morning light, and you remember them or you do not remember them, but either way they remain separate from your waking life. They are like stories you tell yourself while sleeping, entertaining perhaps, or troubling, or mysterious, but always distinct from the reality you inhabit when you open your eyes. He pauses, reaching for a small metal pot that sits near the fire, checking the ice and snow that someone has placed inside it earlier. Finding it melted, he adds a handful of dried herbs from another pouch, creating a tea that begins to fill the tent with a scent both bitter and cleansing, something that speaks of tundra and summer and growing things, incongruous here in this time of cold and darkness. But during the polar night, he continues, his voice steady and measured, the boundary between dreaming and waking becomes like ice that has begun to melt, like the edge of the fjord in spring when you cannot tell where the solid ground ends and the water begins. You close your eyes to sleep, and the dreams that come are so vivid, so rich with detail and sensation, that they feel more real than the waking world. You see colors that do not exist in the darkness around you. You hear voices of people who are far away, or who have died, or who have never existed except in the landscape of your sleeping mind. You walk through places you have never been, yet you know them as intimately as you know the paths around your own camp. He pours some of the steaming tea into 2 small wooden cups, handling the hot liquid with the careful respect it demands, and offers one to you. You accept it, wrapping your cold fingers around the cup, feeling the heat seep into your palms, and bring it to your lips, sipping carefully. The taste is complex, layered, bitter, and sweet at once, and it seems to spread warmth through your chest and belly, pushing back against the cold that never entirely leaves this place. And then you wake, Nico says, his eyes fixed on his own cup, watching the steam rise and dissipate in the firelit air. And for a moment you cannot remember which is real, the dream you have just left or the darkness you have just entered. You lie in your sleeping furs, and the faces you saw in your dream seem more present, more substantial, than the hide walls of the tent around you. The conversations you had while sleeping echo in your mind with more clarity than the words spoken by the people sitting beside you. Time becomes confused. You remember things that have not happened yet, or you forget things that happened only hours ago. You lose the thread of cause and effect, of before and after, of sequence and consequence. You sip the tea slowly, letting its warmth work through you, and think about the dreams you have had since arriving in this place, the way they have indeed been different from the dreams you knew in the world of ordinary days and nights. You remember dreaming of summer, of standing in a field of flowers under a sky so bright it hurt to look at, and when you woke the sensory memory was so strong that you could still smell the flowers, could still feel the sun on your face, and the darkness of the tent seemed like the dream, seemed like something you would wake from if you could only find the right door, the right threshold to cross. Is it dangerous? You ask. This blurring of boundaries? Nico considers this, his weathered face thoughtful in the firelight. Behind him, someone stirs in their sleep, murmurs something incomprehensible, then settles back into stillness. The fire pops softly, sending up another spray of sparks, tiny stars that live and die in the space of a breath. It can be, he says finally. I have known people who became lost in their dreams, who could not find their way back to the waking world with enough conviction to remain tethered to it. They would go through the motions of daily life like sleepwalkers, their eyes open but seeing something else, some interior landscape that had more reality for them than the frozen ground beneath their feet. Some of them eventually returned, found their way back to the present moment, to the solid world of cold and hunger and the necessary tasks of survival. Others, he trails off, leaving the sentence unfinished, and you understand what he does not say, the implication carried in the silence. But it is not only dangerous, he continues after a moment. It is also a kind of gift, this thinness between worlds. The dreams that come during the polar night can show you things you need to know, can bring you understanding that does not come through ordinary thinking. The ancestors visit you in these dreams. The spirits of the animals speak to you. You receive guidance, warnings, knowledge that helps you survive, that helps your family survive, that carries your people through the darkness and into the light that will eventually return. He sets down his cup and reaches for a small leather case that sits among his belongings, opening it carefully to reveal what looks like a drum, though much smaller than the one you saw in the communal tent, small enough to hold in one hand. The drum head is made of stretched hide, pale in the firelight, and the wooden frame is carved with intricate patterns that seem to move and shift as the shadows play across them. This belonged to my grandmother, Nico says quietly, holding the drum with evident reverence, his fingers tracing the carved patterns without conscious thought. She was a no-heedy, one who could travel between worlds, who could speak to the spirits and bring back knowledge from the dreaming places. She taught me that the polar night is not a time of absence, but a time of presence, a time when the veils between different kinds of reality become thin enough to see through, to pass through, if you know how. You lean forward slightly, drawn by the drum, by the patterns carved into its frame, by the sense of age and power that seems to emanate from it like heat from the fire. In the flickering light, the carvings seem to depict figures and animals, though they shift and change as you look at them, refusing to resolve into fixed forms, remaining always at the edge of recognition. She taught me the songs, Nico continues, his voice dropping even lower, becoming almost a whisper, as though the words themselves are sacred, are not meant to be spoken carelessly into the ordinary air. The songs that help you find your way in the dreaming, that protect you from getting lost, that allow you to travel far while remaining tethered to your body, to your breath, to the moment of your return. She taught me how to listen to what the dreams are telling you, how to separate the true visions from the wanderings of a tired mind, how to bring back what is useful and leave behind what would only burden you. He sets the drum down carefully, positioning it where the firelight can play across its surface, and you watch the shadows dance across the stretched hide, creating patterns that might be clouds, might be waves, might be the northern lights themselves, frozen in time and space. Would you like to learn? He asks, and the question hangs in the air between you, heavy with implication, with the weight of transmission, with the sense that what is being offered is not simply information, but initiation into a way of knowing, a way of being in the world that most people from outside this place could not even imagine, much less understand. You find yourself nodding before you have consciously made the decision, drawn by something deeper than rational thought, some recognition that this is why you have come here, why you have allowed yourself to be swallowed by this darkness, why you have given yourself over to the strange rhythms and the stranger dreams of the polar night. You are here to learn something that cannot be learned in the world of ordinary light, in the predictable cycle of day following night following day. You are here to discover what human consciousness becomes when it is stripped of the sun, when it is forced to create its own rhythms, its own meanings, its own small fires against the vast and patient darkness. Nico nods slowly, as though your answer confirms something he has already sensed, and he reaches again for the drum, holding it with both hands now, his fingers positioned with evident familiarity, with the memory of 1,000 similar moments stored in muscle and bone. First, he says, you must understand that what we call sleep and what we call waking are not as separate as you have been taught to believe. They are more like two sides of the same breath, the inhalation and the exhalation, different but inseparable, each giving meaning and purpose to the other. When you sleep, you are not absent from the world. You are simply present to a different aspect of it, a deeper aspect, a layer of reality that exists beneath the surface of ordinary perception. He begins to tap the drum very gently, the sound soft and irregular, almost like a heartbeat, though slower than your own pulse, slower and deeper, a rhythm that seems to come from somewhere beneath the earth rather than from the small hide-covered frame in his hands. The polar night teaches you this, he continues, his voice beginning to synchronize with the drum, the words and the rhythm becoming a single entity, a flow of meaning that enters through your ears and through your skin simultaneously. When the darkness is constant, when there is no clear division between day and night, you begin to understand that consciousness itself is fluid, that awareness moves like water through different states, different levels, different modes of knowing. You begin to experience the continuum rather than the division. You begin to live in the space between. The drum continues, and you find your breathing beginning to slow, beginning to match the rhythm without any conscious effort on your part. Around you, the tent seems to expand and contract with each beat, the walls breathing, the air itself pulsing with gentle life. The others in their sleeping places remain still, but you begin to wonder if they are truly asleep, or if they too are in that other state, that twilight consciousness that Nico is describing, that place between full waking and full dreaming where the boundaries become permeable, where things that cannot ordinarily touch each other meet and merge and create something new. During the polar night, Nico says, his voice now almost singing, the words rising and falling with musical quality, the old people would enter a state they called the long dreaming. They would sleep for many hours each day, much longer than during the summer, but their sleep was not like the deep unconsciousness of exhaustion. It was a working sleep, a conscious sleep, a state in which they traveled through the inner landscapes, gathering wisdom, receiving visions, speaking with the ancestors, preparing for the trials and decisions that would come when the light returned. The rhythm of the drum shifts slightly, becomes more complex, layered, and you can hear patterns within patterns, as though multiple drums are playing at once, though there is still only the one small frame in Nico's hands. The sound seems to fill the tent completely, seems to vibrate in your chest and in your bones, and you feel your normal thinking beginning to quiet, beginning to step aside for something older, something more intuitive, something that knows without knowing how it knows. You will learn to do this, Nico says, and his voice seems to come from very far away now, though he is sitting only a few feet from you across the fire. You will learn to carry your awareness with you into sleep, to remain present even as you surrender to the dreaming. You will learn to set intentions before you close your eyes, to ask questions that the waking mind cannot answer, to seek guidance from sources deeper than ordinary thought. And you will learn to remember, to bring back what you discover, to translate the language of dreams into actions that serve your life, your family, your community. The drum continues, and the fire seems to pulse with it, the flames rising and falling in synchronization with the beat, and you realize that you can no longer tell if your eyes are open or closed, if you are sitting upright by the fire or lying down in your sleeping furs, if you are listening to Nico's voice or remembering it, if this moment is happening now or if it has already happened, will happen again, has always been happening in some eternal present that exists outside of linear time. In the old stories, Nico says, and his voice seems to weave itself into the drum rhythm, becoming part of the pattern, indistinguishable from the sound itself. There was no separation between the world of dreams and the world of waking. The ancestors understood that both were equally real, equally important, equally necessary for a full human life. They did not privilege waking consciousness over dreaming consciousness. They understood that wisdom comes from the ability to move between both states, to bring the gifts of each into the other, to live in the conversation between them rather than choosing one and rejecting the other. You feel yourself drifting, not into sleep exactly, but into some adjacent state, some parallel mode of awareness in which you remain perfectly conscious of your body sitting by the fire, of the cold air on your face, of the smell of smoke and herbs and melting snow. But you are also simultaneously present to something else, some other space that opens behind or beneath or within the physical tent, a space that has its own geography, its own rules, its own forms of life and intelligence. In this space, you see figures moving, though whether they are memories or visions or some combination of both, you cannot tell. You see Nico as a young man, learning these same teachings from his grandmother, sitting by a fire much like this one, holding the drum with uncertain hands, struggling to find the rhythm that will carry him between worlds. You see the grandmother herself, ancient beyond counting, her face a map of the territory she has traveled in both body and spirit, her eyes holding depths that speak of journeys far stranger than any geographical expedition could encompass. You see the tent from outside, see it sitting on the frozen ground like a small glowing seed in the vast darkness, a single point of warmth and consciousness in a landscape that extends for hundreds of miles in every direction, empty of human presence, inhabited only by the patient animals and the patient cold and the patient spirits that have dwelt in this place since long before humans arrived, and will continue long after the last human has departed. You see time itself stretched out like a ribbon, see the cycles of light and dark repeating season after season, year after year, century after century, the same patterns playing out over and over with slight variations, each generation learning the same lessons, making the same discoveries, finding the same pathways through the darkness that their ancestors found, are finding in some eternal now, where past and future collapse into a single pregnant moment. The drum sound begins to shift again, begins to slow, and you feel yourself being gently guided back, called back to the particular moment, to this fire, this tent, this night. Nico's voice returns to ordinary speech, though it carries with it now a resonance it did not have before, as though it has been to the deep places and brought back some quality of that depth. You see, he says softly, and the drum falls silent, the last vibration fading into the quiet crackling of the fire. The polar night is not a punishment or a hardship to be merely endured. It is a doorway, an invitation, a sacred time when the normal rules are suspended and you are given the opportunity to know yourself and the world in ways that are not possible during the summer, when the constant light keeps you fixed in the surface reality, unable to dive beneath it to the strange and necessary depths. You blink, or perhaps you have been blinking all along, and you find yourself fully returned to the tent, to your body, to the solid reality of wood and hide and fire. But something has changed, some fundamental orientation has shifted, and you understand that you have been given a glimpse of something that will take years, perhaps a lifetime, to fully comprehend. Around you, the others begin to stir, responding perhaps to some subtle change in the quality of the space, some signal that the deep night has passed and something resembling morning is approaching. Inga sits up slowly, pushing the furs away from her face, her expression still soft with sleep, but her eyes alert and present. Sven rolls onto his side, stretches, makes a small sound of complaint at the cold that has worked its way into his joints during the night. Nico sets the drum carefully back in its case, handling it with the reverence it deserves, and looks at you across the fire. "This is enough for now," he says quietly. "Understanding comes in layers, like the ice that builds up on the surface of the fjord, one thin sheet at a time, until eventually you can walk across it, can trust it to hold your weight. What I have shown you is just the first layer, the beginning. The rest will come in its own time, through practice, through patience, through your willingness to continue entering the darkness rather than resisting it. You nod, finding yourself without adequate words to respond, and Nico seems to understand this, seems to recognize that what has passed between you exists in a space beyond language, beyond easy articulation. He simply nods back, a small gesture of acknowledgement and respect, and then turns his attention to the practical matters of the morning, to the fire that needs more fuel, to the tea that has gone cold and needs to be heated again, to the food that must be prepared to sustain the living body through another long day of darkness. The others rise slowly, each person emerging from sleep at their own pace, each making the transition from the inner world to the outer world in their own particular way. You watch them, seeing them now with slightly different eyes, wondering what dreams they have been having, what journeys they have taken while their bodies lay still beneath the reindeer hides, what knowledge they have gathered from the deep wells of the polar night. Inga moves to the fire, taking over the task of preparing the morning meal from Nico, her movements efficient and unhurried, the product of a lifetime of similar mornings, similar tents, similar fires tended in similar darkness. She adds more snow to the pot, more dried meat and fat, some of the same herbs that were used for the tea, creating a thin soup that will provide sustenance without requiring too much energy to digest. Sven checks the interior of the tent, examines the places where frost has formed on the walls, judges whether repairs or adjustments are needed to maintain the integrity of their shelter. He moves with quiet competence, his attention focused entirely on the task, and you realize that this is part of the rhythm Nico spoke about, this attention to the small necessary actions that create structure and meaning in a world that offers none, that give shape to time when time has no natural shape. The morning, such as it is, proceeds with calm deliberation. The soup is distributed in wooden bowls, steam rising from the surface, and everyone eats slowly, savoring the warmth, the simple taste of salt and meat and herbs. No one speaks much. Conversation during these early hours is sparse and practical, saved for later in the day when people have fully returned to themselves, when the dreams have released their hold and ordinary consciousness has reasserted its grip on perception and interaction. You eat your soup, feeling it spread warmth through your center, feeling your body begin to wake more fully, to remember itself, to take up again the task of maintaining life in this inhospitable place. The food is plain but satisfying, and you find yourself grateful for it in a way that feels different from ordinary gratitude, deeper and more immediate, a bodily recognition that what you are consuming is not merely nutrition, but a form of care, a gift of continued existence that should never be taken for granted. When the meal is finished, Nico announces that he is going outside to check the weather, to observe the sky, to judge what the day holds in terms of conditions and possibilities. You ask if you might accompany him, and he agrees with a slight nod, already pulling on his outer layers of fur and leather, already preparing his body for the transition from the relative warmth of the tent to the absolute cold that waits beyond the hide walls. You dress carefully, following the example he sets, adding layer upon layer, creating the necessary insulation between your vulnerable flesh and the cold that could kill you in minutes if you were foolish enough to face it unprotected. The process takes time, requires attention, and by the time you are ready you feel bulky and awkward, transformed into something barely recognizable as human, some hybrid creature of fur and hide designed for survival in a world that was never meant for naked skin. Nico pushes aside the entrance flap and steps out into the darkness, and you follow, and the cold hits you immediately, a physical force that takes your breath, that makes your eyes water, that seems to penetrate through all your layers and find the warm core of you with predatory precision. For a moment you cannot move, cannot breathe, can only stand frozen in the threshold between the protected space and the open air, your body shocked into stillness by the sheer intensity of the temperature. But then your lungs remember how to work. You draw in a breath of air so cold it feels like swallowing knives, and you step forward fully into the night, letting the entrance flap fall closed behind you, committing yourself to this exposure, this vulnerability, this direct encounter with the unmediated reality of the Arctic winter. The darkness outside is profound, complete, absolute. There is no moon, no starlight strong enough to illuminate the landscape, no source of light except the faint glow that escapes from the smoke holes of the few tents, small points of warmth scattered across the frozen ground like earthbound stars. Your eyes strain to adjust, but there is almost nothing to adjust to, no gradients of light to parse, no shapes to distinguish from the uniform blackness that surrounds you on all sides. Nico stands a few paces ahead, perfectly still, perfectly at ease in this darkness that seems to you like a solid thing, like something you could reach out and touch. He is looking up, though what he is looking at you cannot discern, and you move carefully to stand beside him, placing your feet with caution on ground you cannot see, trusting to balance and instinct more than to vision. "Listen," he says quietly, and you realize that he is not looking at anything but rather listening, opening himself to the soundscape of the polar night, to the information that arrives through ears rather than eyes. You listen, and gradually you begin to hear what he hears. The wind, first and foremost, steady and low, pushing across the frozen ground with patient insistence, carrying with it the scent of ice and distance. The occasional crack and groan of freezing wood, of ice forming and reforming, of the earth itself contracting in the cold. The soft breathing of the reindeer somewhere nearby, invisible but present, their breath condensing in clouds that you imagine rather than see. And beneath all of this, or perhaps woven through it, a quality of silence so deep and vast that it seems to have presence, seems to be not merely the absence of sound, but a sound in itself, the voice of emptiness, of space, of the patient Arctic waiting. "The wind is steady," Nico says after a long moment. "This is good. When the wind drops completely, that is when the real cold comes, the cold that can freeze flesh in seconds, that makes it dangerous to breathe, that turns even the smallest journey into a gamble with death. But while the wind moves, it keeps the air mixed, keeps the temperature from dropping to its most extreme. We will be able to work today, to tend the herd, to gather ice for melting, to repair what needs repairing." He turns slowly, and you sense rather than see the movement, and begins to walk away from the tent, moving with confident steps across the invisible ground. And you follow, keeping close, not wanting to lose him in this darkness, not wanting to find yourself alone and disoriented in a landscape that offers no landmarks, no reference points. Nothing to tell you which direction leads back to safety, and which leads out into the empty wilderness where people disappear and are never found. As you walk, your eyes continue their futile attempt to gather light, and gradually you begin to perceive that the darkness is not quite uniform, that there are subtle variations in the quality of the black, slight differences in density and texture that your desperate vision seizes upon and magnifies into the suggestion of form. The bulk of the tent becomes visible as a slightly lighter shadow against the surrounding darkness. The ground reveals itself as distinct from the sky by virtue of being marginally less black, or perhaps by virtue of the way it meets your feet, solid and resistant, while the sky remains untouchable overhead. Nico stops walking and crouches down, and you hear the sound of his hands working against the frozen ground, gathering something, though you cannot see what. You crouch beside him and reach out, and your fingers encounter ice, or rather pieces of ice, chunks that have been gathered and stacked here for the purpose of being carried back to the tent and melted for drinking water. The ice is hard and smooth beneath your mittened hands, cold enough that you can feel it even through the thick layers, and you begin to gather pieces into the leather bag that Nico hands you, working by touch alone, learning to navigate this world without vision, learning to trust your other senses to guide you through tasks that you have always relied on sight to accomplish. When the bag is full, Nico stands and begins walking back toward the tent, and you follow, carrying your burden of ice, feeling the weight of it against your back, feeling your way carefully across the frozen ground. The darkness no longer feels quite as hostile as it did when you first emerged. It remains profound, remains complete, but you are beginning to understand that it is not an enemy but simply a condition, a context in which life continues to happen, in which necessary tasks must still be completed, in which humans have learned to navigate and survive and even in their own way to thrive. Back inside the tent, the light and warmth feel overwhelming after even this brief exposure to the outer darkness, and you shed your layers slowly, letting your body readjust to the relative heat, feeling sensation return to your fingers and face in small painful increments. Inga takes the bag of ice and adds chunks to the pot that sits permanently beside the fire, the endless cycle of freezing and melting that sustains life in this place. The day, such as it is, continues in a rhythm that is beginning to feel familiar to you. Small tasks are completed with deliberate care. Food is prepared and eaten. The fire is tended. Conversation rises and falls. Long silences punctuated by short exchanges, by observations about the weather, the herd, the condition of equipment and supplies. Stories are told in fragments, picked up and put down like handwork, resumed later from where they left off with no need for recap or reminder, everyone understanding the larger narrative into which these fragments fit. You find yourself slipping into the rhythm despite yourself, despite your initial resistance to the strangeness of it all, despite the disorientation of living without clear boundaries between night and day, waking and sleeping, dream and reality. You find yourself checking the fire without thinking about it, adding fuel when the flames begin to sink, using the poker to redistribute the burning wood for maximum efficiency. You find yourself moving around the tent with increasing confidence, knowing where things are kept, understanding the invisible rules that govern this shared space, adapting to patterns that were already ancient long before you arrived. In the afternoon, or what you have come to think of as afternoon though the darkness offers no confirmation, Sven brings out materials for repairing one of his boots, and you watch as he works the leather with patient skill, his fingers moving with practiced certainty, creating new stitching to replace what is worn through, reinforcing vulnerable areas, treating the hide with fat to maintain its flexibility in the cold. He works in silence mostly, but occasionally he comments on what he is doing, explaining the reasoning behind each choice, sharing knowledge that has been passed down through generations, knowledge that means the difference between functional gear and dangerous failure. You ask if you might try your hand at a similar repair, showing him a seam in your own boot that has begun to separate, and he nods approvingly, handing you the tools and materials you will need, positioning himself where he can observe and correct as necessary. The work is harder than it looks, requires more strength in the fingers than you anticipated, demands precision and patience in equal measure. The stitching must be tight enough to hold, but not so tight that it tears the leather. The spacing must be regular, even, creating a seam that distributes stress uniformly rather than concentrating it in weak points. As you work, you enter a state of focused concentration that empties your mind of other concerns, that narrows your awareness down to the small field of action under your hands, to the needle and the thread and the leather, to the incremental progress from one stitch to the next. Time disappears. The darkness outside becomes irrelevant. All that exists is this moment, this action, this small repair that matters because it contributes to your survival, because it extends the functionality of gear that you depend upon absolutely in this unforgiving environment. When the repair is complete, Sven examines it carefully, testing the seam with strong fingers, checking the tension and the spacing, and finally he nods with what seems like genuine approval. "Good," he says simply. "You are learning. In time, you will be able to do this without thinking. Your hands will know the movements, will find the rhythm, and you will be able to repair gear even in complete darkness, even when your fingers are so cold you can barely feel them, which is often when you most need to make such repairs." The compliment, spare as it is, fills you with unexpected pride, with a sense that you are beginning to earn your place here, beginning to contribute rather than merely observe, beginning to transform from outsider to something approaching participant. These are small victories, small competencies, but in this place they matter enormously. They are the currency of respect, the foundation of belonging. Evening approaches, if such a term means anything here, and the tent settles into a deeper quiet as people begin to prepare for the night, for the hours of rest and dreaming that lie ahead. You think about what Nico taught you earlier, about the long dreaming, about carrying awareness into sleep, about the possibility of journeying consciously through the inner landscapes while the body rests beneath its layers of fur. As you prepare your sleeping place, arranging the hides in the configuration that provides maximum warmth and comfort, you find yourself setting an intention, choosing a question to take into the dreaming, just as Nico suggested. You want to understand why you have come here, what you are seeking in this darkness, what knowledge or transformation you hope to find at the edge of the world, in the longest night, in the suspended time when normal rules no longer apply. You settle into the furs, pull them tight around your body, and watch the fire slowly burning down, the flames becoming smaller and smaller, the light diminishing by subtle degrees, the shadows deepening and spreading until they have reclaimed almost all of the tent's interior. Across the dying fire, you can just make out Nico's face, his eyes already closed, his breathing already deepened into sleep, and you wonder what dreams he is having, what journeys he is taking, what conversations he is conducting with ancestors and spirits in that other world that exists parallel to this one, separated by the thinnest of veils. Your own eyes grow heavy, and you let them close, surrendering to the pull of sleep, but you try to maintain some thread of awareness, some small light of consciousness that does not fully extinguish but remains present, witnessing, observing the transition from waking to dreaming, from ordinary reality to the strange fluid realm where different rules apply, where time bends and space folds and the dead speak to the living, and the future casts shadows backward into the present. You feel yourself descending, not into unconsciousness, but into another kind of consciousness, deeper and older, and the tent around you begins to transform, its walls becoming transparent, then disappearing altogether, and you find yourself standing on a vast plain of ice that extends in all directions without limit, beneath a sky that is dark but not entirely black, shot through with curtains of green and purple light that move and shift like living things, like the breath of the sky itself. Made visible, and in the distance, far across the ice, you see figures approaching, moving toward you with patient deliberation, and though you cannot yet discern their features, you know somehow that they are coming to meet you, that they have something to tell you, that the question you brought into the dreaming has been heard and is now being answered in the only language the dreaming knows, the language of symbol and image and felt sense, the language that bypasses ordinary thought and speaks directly to the deep knowing that lives in the body, in the bones, in the blood. You wait for them, standing alone on the infinite ice, beneath the dancing lights, in the heart of the polar night, in the place where all boundaries dissolve, where the living and the dead, the past and the future, the inner and the outer worlds meet and merge and speak to each other in voices older than words, older than humanity itself, older than anything except the darkness and the cold and the patient turning of the seasons that brings the light back again, always, eventually, though the wait may be long and the night may seem endless. This is where you are now. This is what you have become. A dreamer in the long night, learning to sleep like the Arctic nomads sleep, learning to carry your awareness into the depths, learning to return with knowledge that cannot be found in the ordinary waking world, knowledge that is earned only through surrender, through patience, through the willingness to close your eyes and trust that you will open them again, that dawn will come, that the darkness, however profound, is not the final word but merely one half of the breath, the exhalation that must precede the next inhalation, the night that promises the eventual return of day. You have learned to read the darkness now, the way your ancestors read it, with a literacy that has nothing to do with letters or symbols, but with the weight of the air and the texture of time itself. The polar night no longer presses against you as it once did. Back when you first arrived in this long stretch of winter, back when the hours seemed to lose their shape and your mind fought against the absence of the sun. Now, in these final weeks before the light returns, you find yourself moving through the darkness with a kind of fluency, a practiced grace that comes only after months of surrender. The settlement has changed, or perhaps you have changed, and the distinction no longer seems important. What matters is that you know the pathways between dwellings without needing to think about them, that your feet find the packed snow trails in complete darkness, that your hands reach for the door latch at precisely the right height and angle. The body learns what the mind cannot always articulate, and in the long polar night, the body becomes a vessel of accumulated wisdom, carrying you through hours and days that have ceased to announce themselves in any conventional way. You sit now in the communal space, the fire reduced to embers that glow with a deep persimmon warmth, and around you the others are engaged in the quiet activities that have sustained them through these months. An elder woman is working sinew through her fingers, preparing thread for spring repairs, her hands moving with a rhythm so steady it seems almost mechanical, though there is grace in it, a kind of meditation made visible. Two young men are carving tools from bone and antler, their knives making soft scraping sounds that blend with the crackling of the embers and the occasional settling of snow on the roof above. A mother hums to her infant, a melody so low and continuous it becomes part of the ambient sound, indistinguishable from breath or heartbeat. You have come to understand that sleep here is not a single thing but a spectrum, a continuum that stretches from full waking consciousness through various gradations of rest and dream and back again. There are moments when you sit with your eyes open, watching the fire, and yet you are not entirely present, your mind drifting through memories or half-formed thoughts that have the quality of visions. There are other times when you lie down and close your eyes and sink immediately into something deeper, a blackness within blackness, a rest so profound it feels like a small death, and you emerge from it hours later with no sense of having been anywhere at all, as though time itself had paused. The distinction between these states has become less important than the flow between them, the way you have learned to move from one to another without resistance or judgment. You do not fight the drowsiness that comes over you in mid-afternoon, if afternoon still means anything in this lightless stretch. You do not force yourself to stay awake when the community gathers in the evening, if evening still has meaning here. Instead, you allow your body to guide you, to tell you when it needs to retreat into sleep and when it can remain in the waking world. And this allowance, this trust in your own rhythms, has become a kind of liberation. The elder who told you about the ancestors and their journeys through the dark months is sitting near the fire now, his face half illuminated by the ember glow, and he is speaking again, though not to anyone in particular, his words offered to the space itself, to whoever might be listening. He is telling a story about a winter when he was a young man, when the darkness seemed to last longer than usual, when the community began to wonder if the sun would ever return at all. He speaks of the fear that crept in during those final weeks, the way some people began to doubt, to question whether they had done something to offend the natural order, whether they were being punished for some transgression they could not name. But he also speaks of the moment when someone noticed that the quality of the darkness had changed, that there was a faint luminosity on the horizon at certain hours, a barely perceptible shift in the weight of the night. And how that small change, that subtle intimation of coming light, transformed everything, how it reminded them that the darkness was not permanent, that it was part of a cycle, that patience and trust were always rewarded in the end. He speaks of this not with triumph, but with a kind of tender relief, as though even now, decades later, he can still feel the gratitude that swept through the community when they understood that the light was returning, that they had survived another long night. You listen to his words and feel them settle into you, not as information, but as something deeper, a kind of ballast that steadies you from within. You realize that this is what these stories do, what they have always done. They carry the experience of those who came before. They transmit not just facts, but the emotional truth of endurance, the lived reality of waiting and trusting and surviving. And in listening to them, you are connected to a lineage that stretches back through generations, through centuries, through millennia of people who faced the same darkness, who asked the same questions, who found the same answers written in their own bodies and in the rhythms of the world around them. The days now, if you can still call them days, have taken on a quality of anticipation. There is no visible change yet, no sun breaking over the horizon, but there is something else, something you cannot quite name, but that everyone in the community seems to feel. It is in the way people move, a slight quickening in their step, a brightness in their voices that was not there a month ago. It is in the way conversations turn toward the future, toward plans for spring, toward the tasks that will need to be done once the ice begins to break and the snow begins to melt. It is as though the community is waking up, not all at once but gradually, the way the land itself will wake when the sun returns. You find yourself drawn more often to the places where you can see the southern horizon, such as it is, a line between earth and sky that remains dark, but that holds within it the promise of change. You stand there in the cold, wrapped in your furs, and you watch that line the way sailors once watched the horizon for signs of land, searching for the first hint of light, the first pale glow that will signal the end of this long night. And even though you see nothing yet, even though the darkness remains complete, you feel something shifting inside you, a readiness, a gathering of energy that has been dormant through the winter months. The sleep you take now feels different, purposeful in a new way. Where before you slept to pass the time, to conserve energy, to escape the monotony of darkness, now you sleep with a sense of preparation, as though your body is storing rest the way it once stored food, building reserves for the activity and intensity that will come with the return of light. Your dreams have changed too, becoming more vivid, more kinetic, filled with images of movement and color and brightness. You dream of walking across vast distances, of the sun on your face, of water running over stones, of birds in flight against a pale blue sky. You dream of green things growing, of flowers opening, of the smell of earth warming under daylight. When you wake from these dreams, there is a moment of disorientation, a gap between the vibrant world you inhabited in sleep and the dark, quiet world you return to in waking. But the gap is not painful, not anymore. Instead, it feels like a bridge, a connection between what was and what will be, and you carry the dreams with you through your waking hours, letting them color your perceptions, letting them remind you that this darkness is temporary, that change is coming, that the cycle will complete itself as it always has. The community begins to prepare in small, almost ritualistic ways. Tools are sharpened and oiled, though they will not be needed for weeks yet. Clothing is inspected and repaired, seams reinforced, furs cleaned and aired. Food stores are inventoried, not out of worry, but out of a kind of ceremonial acknowledgement that the time of depletion is nearly over, that abundance will return with the light. There is a sense of collective readiness, of shared anticipation, and you are part of it now in a way you were not at the beginning of winter, fully integrated into the rhythms and rituals that govern this place. One evening, or what would be evening if such distinctions still held meaning. The community gathers for a meal that feels different from the others you have shared through the long months. There is more food than usual, a slight extravagance drawn from the stores that have sustained you all winter, and there is a quality of celebration in the air, though nothing is explicitly said. People eat slowly, savoring each bite, and the conversation flows more freely than it has in weeks, punctuated by laughter and the kind of gentle teasing that speaks of deep affection and familiarity. After the meal, one of the younger women produces a drum, a wide shallow frame covered with stretched hide, and she begins to tap it with a softly padded mallet, creating a rhythm that is both hypnotic and enlivening. Others join in, some with their own instruments, others simply clapping or humming, and soon the space is filled with a music that seems to well up from some ancient source, a sound that predates language, that speaks directly to something primal and essential in the human soul. You feel it in your chest, in your bones, this music, and you find yourself swaying slightly, your body responding to the rhythm without conscious thought. The music continues for a long time, ebbing and flowing, speeding up and slowing down, and people begin to dance, not in any formal way, but with a looseness and joy that comes from months of restraint finally being released. You watch at first, then find yourself standing, then moving, your body joining the others in this collective expression of survival and anticipation. The firelight plays across the walls, casting moving shadows that dance with you, and for a time you lose yourself completely in the rhythm and the warmth and the sense of being part of something larger than yourself, something that has endured through countless dark winters and will endure through countless more. When the music finally subsides and people begin to drift back to their places, to their rest, you feel altered, lightened, as though some burden you did not know you were carrying has been lifted. You return to your sleeping place and lie down, wrapping yourself in the furs that have become so familiar, and you close your eyes and let the echoes of the music carry you down into sleep. In the days that follow, you notice subtle changes in the quality of the darkness. At first you think it might be your imagination, a projection of your own hopes and desires, but then others begin to mention it too, pointing to the southern horizon during what would be midday, noting that the blackness there is not quite as absolute as it was, that there is a faint gradation, a barely perceptible lightening that suggests the sun, still far below the horizon, is nevertheless making its presence felt. The change is so subtle that if you looked away and then looked back, you might not notice it at all, but over the course of days it becomes undeniable, a slow brightening that fills the community with a quiet jubilation. You find yourself sleeping less now, or perhaps sleeping differently, your rest becoming lighter, more easily interrupted by the small sounds and movements around you. Your body seems to be recalibrating itself, preparing for the demands of a different kind of time, a sunlit time, when activity will once again be governed by the movement of light across the sky rather than by the internal rhythms you have cultivated through the dark months. There is a restlessness in you now, a readiness to move, to do, to engage with the world in ways that have been impossible during the long night. The elder who has guided you through so much of this experience finds you one day standing at the edge of the settlement, looking toward the southern horizon, and he comes to stand beside you without speaking. Together you watch the faint glow that marks the place where the sun will eventually appear, and the silence between you is comfortable, companionable, the silence of two people who have shared something profound and do not need words to acknowledge it. After a time he speaks, his voice low and contemplative. He tells you that the end of the polar night is in some ways more difficult than the middle, that the anticipation can be harder to bear than the endurance, that the waiting for light when you know it is coming requires its own kind of patience. He tells you that this is when people sometimes make mistakes, pushing themselves too hard, venturing out too far too soon, misjudging the cold or the distances because they are so eager for change. He tells you to be careful in these final days, to maintain the discipline and awareness that have kept you safe through the long darkness, to remember that the night is not over until it is truly over. You thank him for his words, for all his words through these months, and you feel a swell of gratitude for this community that has held you, taught you, kept you alive through a season that once seemed unimaginable. You understand now that survival here is not an individual achievement, but a collective one, that no one makes it through the polar night alone, that the web of care and knowledge and tradition that connects everyone is what makes life possible in this extreme place. The sleep you take that night is deep and dreamless, a final plunge into the profound rest you have learned to access during these dark months. When you wake, there is a change in the air, a subtle shift that you feel before you understand it. You rise and dress and step outside, and there, on the southern horizon, is a thin line of pale gray light, the first true hint of the sun's return. It is not the sun itself, not yet, but it is the promise of it, the herald of a new season, and you stand transfixed, watching that line grow infinitesimally brighter as the minutes pass. Others emerge from their dwellings, drawn by the same pull, and soon the entire community is standing in the cold, watching the horizon in silence. No one speaks, no one needs to. The moment speaks for itself, carrying within it all the accumulated weight of the months you have endured together, all the sleep and waking, all the stories and silences, all the trust and patience and quiet faith that the darkness would end and the light would return. You realize, standing there in the cold with the community around you and the first pale light of dawn touching the edge of the world, that you have been transformed by this experience in ways you are only beginning to understand. You have learned to sleep in a new way, to rest in a new way, to be in time in a new way. You have learned that darkness is not the enemy but a teacher, that waiting is not passive but active, that survival is not about fighting against the conditions of life, but about aligning yourself with them, about finding the rhythms and patterns that allow you to endure and even thrive in circumstances that seem, on the surface, impossible. The light on the horizon grows slowly, incrementally, and you know it will be days yet before the sun actually appears, before its rim breaks the line between earth and sky and spills its gold across the frozen world. But the anticipation is no longer painful or difficult. It is simply part of the process, part of the cycle, and you are content to wait, to watch, to let the change unfold in its own time. You return to your dwelling and lie down again, not because you are tired, but because you want to savor this liminal moment, this threshold between dark and light, between one season and another. You close your eyes and let yourself drift, and the sleep that comes is unlike any you have experienced during the long night. It is light and floating, shot through with awareness, and you can feel the world turning beneath you, rotating slowly toward the sun, carrying you with it from darkness into light. When you surface again, hours have passed, though you cannot say how many. The quality of the air has changed, the cold taking on a crystalline clarity that speaks of approaching transformation. You rise and join the community once more, and together you go about the small tasks that fill the days, but everything feels different now, infused with a sense of completion, of closure, of one chapter ending and another about to begin. The nights now, and they are still nights, still dark, though not as dark as they were, are filled with a particular quality of rest that feels both nostalgic and forward-looking. You sleep knowing that each time you close your eyes might be one of the last times you sleep in complete darkness, that soon your rest will be governed once again by the presence and absence of the sun, by the familiar rhythms of day and night that most of the world takes for granted, but that you will never take for granted again. You dream of light, of warmth, of color returning to the world, but you also dream of the darkness, of the deep quiet of the polar night, of the way time dissolved and reformed around you, of the lessons learned in the absence of the sun. And you wake from these dreams with a sense of gratitude, a feeling that you have been given something precious, something rare, an experience that has marked you and changed you and made you part of a lineage of people who know what it means to endure the endless night and emerge on the other side. The community continues its preparations, and you are part of them, your hands doing the work that needs to be done, your presence adding to the collective energy of readiness and anticipation. There is a sense of closure now, a feeling that the story of this particular winter is coming to an end, that soon there will be new stories, stories of light and warmth and growth, but that this story, the story of how you learned to sleep through the endless polar night, will remain with you forever, a foundation upon which everything else will be built. You stand once more at the edge of the settlement, looking toward the horizon where the light grows perceptibly brighter with each passing day, and you feel a deep calm settle over you. You have done what your ancestors did, what countless others have done before you, and what countless others will do after you. You have survived the darkness, not by fighting it, but by learning to move with it, to rest within it, to let it teach you its lessons. And now, as the light returns, you carry those lessons with you, woven into the fabric of who you are, part of your body's knowledge and your soul's understanding. The sleep you will take tonight, and in the nights to come, will be different from the sleep you took at the height of the polar night, but it will be informed by it, shaped by it, deepened by it. You have learned that sleep is not just a biological necessity, but a practice, a skill, a way of being in the world that can be cultivated and refined. You have learned that rest is not weakness but strength, that surrender is not defeat but wisdom, that in the darkest times, the deepest rest can be a form of courage. And as the community settles in for the evening, as the fires are banked and the lamps are dimmed and people retreat to their sleeping places, you lie down once more in the darkness, wrapping yourself in your furs, closing your eyes, and letting yourself sink into the familiar embrace of sleep. You know that the light is coming, that change is inevitable, that nothing stays the same. But for now, in this moment, you are content to rest in the darkness one more time, to honor it, to thank it, to let it carry you through one more night before the dawn finally breaks and the world is transformed once again. You wake on the morning of the spring equinox, and the light that filters through the sealskin above you is different now, touched with gold instead of the flat silver gray you have carried in your eyes for so many months. The sound of meltwater dripping from the roof frame reaches you before full awareness does, a slow percussion that marks the world's thaw, drop by patient drop. You lie still beneath the reindeer hides, feeling the warmth gathered there, the weight familiar and secure, and you listen to the dripping as though it were music composed solely for this threshold between one season and the next. The others are already stirring. You hear your grandmother's voice, low and steady, speaking to your mother near the entrance. The words are indistinct, but the cadence is known to you, the rise and fall of syllables that have shaped every winter morning of your life. You smell the sharp, clean scent of melting snow mixing with the residual smoke of last night's fire, the cullic oil spent now, leaving only the faint memory of flame and rendered fat. The air inside the shelter holds a new quality, a softness at its edges where the deep cold used to press. You understand, without needing to be told, that the long darkness has finally loosened its grip. You rise slowly, folding the hides back with the same deliberate care your mother taught you, the same care her mother taught her, the gestures inherited like the patterns on mittens or the songs sung over seal meat. Your body feels different this morning, less dense, as though the months of sleeping through endless night have refined something within you, distilled you into a quieter, more attentive version of yourself. You dress in layers, pulling on the inner garments first, then the outer, feeling the familiar compression of fur against your limbs, the way the stitching holds firm at every seam. Outside, the snow still covers the ground, but it is no longer the hard, wind-scoured surface of midwinter. It has softened, dimpled with the first signs of settling, and where the sun touches it directly, the crystals gleam with a wet brilliance that makes you squint. The sky is pale blue, stretched thin above the white expanse, and the horizon is visible now, no longer swallowed by the dark. You stand in the threshold and breathe deeply, filling your lungs with air that tastes different, less metallic, carrying the faint promise of tundra moss and open water. The camp is already in motion. Several families have begun dismantling their winter shelters, rolling up hides, folding frames, stacking everything with the practiced efficiency that comes from doing this work every spring for generations. You see children running between the structures, their voices bright and sharp in the cold air. Their laughter a sound you realize you have not heard in its fullness for many weeks. The dogs are more animated too, tails high, ears forward, sensing the shift in light and routine. One of the younger dogs breaks free from its tether and bounds across the snow, leaping and spinning, and the sight makes you smile, a small warmth kindling in your chest. Your uncle approaches, carrying a bundle of sinew-bound poles over his shoulder. He nods to you, his face weathered and calm, his eyes holding the same quiet readiness you see in your father's face, in your grandfather's. He does not speak, but his presence is a form of communication, a confirmation that the work of transition has begun and that you are part of it. You fall into step beside him, helping to carry the poles to the sled where other materials are being gathered. The wood is cold and smooth under your palms, worn by use and care, and you handle it with the respect it deserves. The morning unfolds in a series of tasks, each one small but necessary, each one part of the larger rhythm of departure. You help pack dried fish into skin bags, tie bundles of clothing with strips of hide, dismantle the drying racks that have stood empty since the last hunt. Your hands remember the motions, the knots, the angles, and you move through the work with a kind of meditation, your mind present but not cluttered, focused but not strained. Around you, the camp hums with quiet industry, voices murmuring, sleds scraping, dogs barking intermittently, the whole community engaged in the same choreography of leaving. By midday, the sun is higher than it has been in months, casting short shadows that seem strange after so long without them. You pause in your work to look at your own shadow on the snow, stretching your arms wide to see the dark shape mirror you. It feels like meeting an old friend, this simple silhouette, and you stand there for a moment longer than necessary, reacquainting yourself with the presence of light strong enough to carve darkness from brightness. Your grandmother calls you over to where she sits on a low stool, sorting through a collection of tools and implements spread on a piece of tanned hide. She gestures for you to sit, and you lower yourself beside her, your knees sinking slightly into the soft snow. She does not look at you directly, but her attention is fully present, her hands moving over the tools with deliberate care. She picks up a small scraping blade, its edge worn smooth by years of use, and she holds it up to the light, turning it slowly. "This belonged to my mother," she says, her voice quiet and textured, each word shaped with intention. "And to her mother before that. It has scraped more hides than I can count, more than you will ever count, perhaps. But it has done its work well, and it will do more still." She places the blade in your palm, closing your fingers over it gently. You feel the weight of it, the coolness of the bone handle, the faint roughness where hands have held it across decades. You understand that this is not merely a tool being passed to you, but a continuity, a thread connecting you to the women who came before, to the work they did, the winters they endured, the darkness they slept through and woke from, season after season. "Take care of it," she says, "and it will take care of you." You nod, holding the blade carefully, feeling the responsibility settle into you like warmth into cold stone. She returns to her sorting, and you remain beside her, watching her hands, learning again from the economy of her movements, the precision, the absence of waste. She has lived through more polar nights than you have years, and yet she moves with undiminished purpose, her body still attuned to the demands of this life, her mind still sharp and clear. After a while, she speaks again, her gaze fixed on the tools before her. "The darkness is not an enemy," she says. "It is a part of the world, like light, like breath. We do not fight it. We live within it, and we wait for the light to return. And it always returns. You feel the truth of this in your bones, in the memories of every winter you have known, every long night of sleep and stillness, every morning of waking to find the world still intact, still enduring. The darkness has taught you patience, has taught you to trust in cycles, to understand that absence is not the same as ending." By late afternoon, the camp is nearly packed. The sleds are loaded high, lashed securely, ready for the journey to the spring hunting grounds. The dogs are harnessed, restless and eager, their breath clouding in the cold air. You stand with your family, looking back at the place where you spent the winter, the shallow depressions in the snow where the shelters stood, the scattered embers of the central fire pit, now cold and gray. There is no ceremony of leaving, no formal goodbye. You simply turn, following the others, and begin to walk. The snow crunches under your boots, a sound that has become so familiar it is almost comforting. The sled slides smoothly behind the dogs, the runners gliding over the compacted surface. You walk in a line with the others, your family interspersed with the other families, the whole group moving together in a loose but coordinated procession. The sun moves slowly across the sky, its arc wider now, its light lingering longer each day. As you walk, you think about the nights you have slept through, the dreams you have carried, the stories you have heard. You think about your grandmother's hands on the lamp, your mother's voice in the dark, your cousin's laughter before sleep. You think about the seal meat that sustained you, the hides that warmed you, the oil that lit your way. You think about the silence and the wind, the cold and the stillness, the way time moved differently in the darkness, slower and deeper, like water under ice. The journey to the spring grounds takes several days, and each night you make camp in a different place, setting up temporary shelters, lighting small fires, eating dried meat and melted snow. The nights are still long, but they are no longer endless. The twilight stretches before full dark, and the dawn comes earlier each morning, the sky brightening with a speed that feels almost hurried after the slow creep of winter's end. You sleep differently now, not with the deep, heavy sleep of the polar night, but with a lighter, more restless awareness. Your body is adjusting to the return of light, recalibrating its rhythms, learning again how to measure time in hours rather than in the slow drift of darkness. You wake more often, rising to step outside the shelter and look at the sky, watching the stars fade as the horizon begins to glow. On the third night of travel, you wake to find the sky streaked with green light, the aurora moving in slow waves above you, rippling and folding like fabric caught in an invisible current. You stand outside, wrapped in your parka, and watch the lights dance. Others emerge from their shelters too, drawn by the same silent pull, and you all stand together in the cold, looking up, saying nothing. The aurora has returned many times throughout the winter, But tonight it feels different, a celebration rather than a vigil, a flourish of color to mark the season's turn. Your father stands beside you, his breath visible in the cold air. He does not speak, but after a moment he places a hand on your shoulder, a brief touch that conveys more than words. You feel the weight of his hand, the warmth through the layers of fur, and you understand that he is proud of you, that you have done what was needed, that you have slept through the darkness and emerged on the other side. When you reach the spring hunting grounds, the landscape has changed. The snow is thinner here, blown clear in places to reveal patches of dark ground, and the air carries the faint scent of wet earth and thawing vegetation. The ice on the sea is beginning to fracture, long cracks running through the surface, and you can hear the distant sound of water moving beneath it, a low, grinding rumble that speaks of immense forces at work. The camp is set up in a sheltered valley, protected from the wind by low hills on three sides. The families spread out, each choosing a spot, and the work of building begins again. But this time, the shelters are lighter, more temporary, built for mobility and ease rather than for enduring long darkness. You help raise the frames, stretch the hides, secure the ropes, moving through the familiar tasks with renewed energy. That evening, the entire camp gathers around a large fire built in the center of the valley. The flames leap high, fed by driftwood collected from the shore, and the heat radiates outward in waves, pushing back the cold. The elders sit closest to the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering light, their voices rising and falling as they speak. The younger children run and play in the space beyond the fire's reach, their silhouettes darting through the dusk. Your grandfather stands and begins to speak, his voice carrying across the gathering. He tells a story you have heard before, a story about the first people who lived in these lands, who learned to survive the darkness by listening to the rhythms of the world, by paying attention to the animals, the ice, the stars. He speaks slowly, pausing between sentences, allowing each word to settle. You listen, even though you know the story, because each telling is different, shaped by the season, by the faces around the fire, by the particular quality of the light. When he finishes, another elder takes his place, and then another, each one adding a story, a memory, a piece of accumulated knowledge. You listen to all of them, feeling the words weave together into a larger fabric, a tapestry of survival and continuity, of nights endured and mornings welcomed. Later, when the fire has burned down to glowing coals and the crowd has thinned, you sit with your cousin near the edge of the light. She is quiet, her face thoughtful, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm broth. After a while, she speaks, her voice soft. "I dreamed every night," she says, "all through the darkness. I dreamed of light." You nod, understanding. You dreamed too, though your dreams were different, filled with images of ice and movement, of journeys across frozen seas. But the impulse was the same, the mind's way of holding on to something beyond the immediate darkness, of keeping a vision of change alive even in the longest night. "And now the light is here," she continues. "And it feels like the dreams were a bridge, like they carried me across." "Yes," you say. "That is what they were." She smiles, a small, private expression, and you sit together in silence, watching the embers glow and fade, feeling the cold air press in as the fire's heat diminishes. Around you, the camp settles into sleep, the sounds of rustling hides and murmured goodbyes, the soft patting of dogs circling before lying down. You return to your family's shelter and crawl beneath the hides, lying on your back, looking up at the dim shape of the roof above you. The darkness inside is not complete now. A faint glow filters through the seams, a reminder that outside, the sky is never fully black anymore. You close your eyes and let your breathing slow, feeling the day's work in your muscles, the satisfying ache of effort and accomplishment. Sleep comes easily, a gentle descent rather than a plunge, and your dreams are quiet, filled with the sound of water and the rustle of wind through new grass. You dream of walking across the tundra in summer, the ground soft and yielding beneath your feet, the air warm and bright. You dream of birds returning, their calls sharp and joyful, filling the sky with movement and song. When you wake, it is to the sound of your mother preparing food, the familiar scrape of knife against wood, the soft thud of dried meat being placed into a bowl. You stretch, feeling the pull of muscles, the pleasant stiffness of a body that has worked well and rested deeply. The light inside the shelter is brighter now, almost cheerful, and you can hear the voices of others outside, already engaged in the day's tasks. You rise and dress, stepping out into the morning. The sun is above the horizon, climbing steadily, and the valley is bathed in clear, cold light. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with air that tastes of stone and snow and distance, and you feel a quiet gratitude rise within you, wordless and whole. The days that follow are filled with activity. The hunters prepare their weapons, checking lines and blades, discussing strategy in low voices. The women work on repairing clothing, mending tiers, reinforcing seams, ensuring that everyone is ready for the work ahead. The children are set to small tasks, fetching water, gathering brush, watching the younger ones, learning through participation the responsibilities they will carry more fully as they grow. You join a group that walks down to the shore, where the ice is breaking up in earnest now, the floes grinding against each other with a sound like distant thunder. You watch as a seal surfaces in a gap between two sheets of ice, its dark head sleek and round, its eyes large and curious. It watches you for a moment, unafraid, then dives smoothly, disappearing beneath the surface without a ripple. Your uncle, standing beside you, speaks quietly. "The seals are returning," he says. "The hunt will begin soon." You nod, feeling the anticipation that runs through the camp, the readiness. The winter has been a time of rest and conservation, but now the season of abundance is returning, and with it the work of gathering and storing, of ensuring that when the darkness comes again, there will be enough to carry you through. But that is a concern for another day. For now, you stand on the shore, watching the ice shift and fracture, feeling the wind on your face, the sun on your back. You think about the nights you have slept through, the darkness you have inhabited, the patience you have learned. You think about the lamp's small flame, the stories told in whispers, the warmth of bodies huddled together against the cold. And you understand, in a way that is deeper than thought, that the darkness and the light are two halves of the same whole, that you cannot have one without the other. That survival here means embracing both, moving with the rhythms, trusting in the return of the sun even when it seems impossibly distant. You turn from the shore and walk back toward the camp, your boots crunching in the snow, your breath steady and even. The sky above is wide and clear, a pale dome stretching to every horizon. The world feels vast and open, full of possibility, and you feel small within it, but not insignificant. You are a part of this place, woven into its cycles, shaped by its demands, sustained by its gifts. That night, you lie down to sleep with the knowledge that tomorrow the sun will rise again, and the day after that, and the day after that, each one a little longer, a little brighter, until the midnight sun arrives and the land is bathed in continuous light. And then, after months of that, the darkness will return, slowly at first, then more quickly, until once again you are sleeping through the long polar night, waiting for the light to come back, trusting that it will. But you do not fear the darkness. You have learned to sleep through it, to carry dreams within it, to find rest and stillness in its depths. You have learned that darkness is not absence, but a different kind of presence, a space for renewal and patience, a time for stories and closeness, for small flames and quiet voices. You close your eyes, feeling the hides around you, the warmth gathered there, the familiar weight. You hear your family breathing nearby, the soft sounds of sleep, the occasional murmur or sigh. You hear the wind moving across the valley, the distant crack of ice, the muted barking of a dog. And you let yourself drift, your body relaxing, your mind settling, the borders between waking and sleeping blurring and softening. You drift through images and sensations, through memories and imaginings, through the accumulated texture of your days and nights, your winters and summers, your darkness and light. And as you drift, you feel a profound sense of continuity, of being part of something larger and older than yourself, a lineage of survival and adaptation, of people who learned to live in one of the harshest environments on Earth, who found ways not just to endure, but to thrive, to create beauty and meaning, to raise children and tell stories, to craft tools and sing songs, to sleep through endless polar nights and wake to greet the returning sun. You feel the blade your grandmother gave you, tucked safely among your belongings, its bone handle worn smooth by the hands of women you never met, but who are with you still, in the knowledge they passed down, in the skills they taught, in the persistence they embodied. You feel the weight of that inheritance, the responsibility, but also the gift, the deep gift of belonging to a people and a place, of knowing your role and your work, of understanding that your life is both your own and part of something much larger. And in that understanding, you find a peace that goes beyond comfort, a settledness that is not complacency but acceptance, a readiness to meet whatever comes with the same steady patience that carried you through the darkest months. You know there will be hardships ahead, challenges and losses, moments of fear and uncertainty. But you also know that you have within you the capacity to endure, to adapt, to sleep through the darkness and wake to the light, again and again, for as long as you are given. The fire in the center of the camp has burned down now, reduced to a faint glow beneath a layer of ash. The stars are out, bright and distant, scattered across the dome of the sky like frost on dark stone. The aurora stirs in the north, a faint shimmer of green, a reminder that the world is always in motion, always changing, always returning. You breathe slowly, deeply, feeling the cold air fill your lungs, then release, warm and moist, into the space around you. You feel your heartbeat, steady and sure, the rhythm that has carried you through every moment of your life, that will carry you through all the moments to come. And you let go, finally, of the need to hold anything, to understand everything, to control or predict. You let go and simply rest, trusting in the hides to keep you warm, in your family to watch over you, in the land to provide, in the seasons to turn, in the light to return. You sleep, and in your sleep, you dream of walking across snow that stretches to the horizon, of following tracks that lead into the distance, of hearing voices calling you home. You dream of lamps being lit in the darkness, small flames that grow and multiply, that join together into a great light that fills the sky. You dream of seals rising from the water, of birds returning from the south, of flowers blooming in brilliant profusion across the tundra. You dream of your grandmother's hands, strong and certain, shaping hide into clothing, bone into tools, darkness into story. You dream of your mother's voice, low and rhythmic, singing you into sleep and out again, the melody a thread connecting night to day, winter to summer, past to future. You dream of your own hands, learning the same work, making the same motions, carrying the same knowledge forward into the next generation, and the next, an unbroken line reaching back into the depths of time and forward into the unknown future. And in the dream, you understand that this is how your people have always survived, not by fighting the darkness, but by moving through it with patience and care, not by fearing the cold, but by learning to live within it, to find warmth in connection and purpose, to trust in the return of light even when it seems furthest away. You dream of sleeping through endless polar nights, of waking to endless polar days, of the world turning beneath you, constant and indifferent and beautiful, and of your place within it, small but essential, temporary but connected to everything that came before and everything that will come after. And the dream carries you gently, like a current beneath ice, moving you through the night toward morning, through darkness toward light, through sleep toward waking, in the eternal rhythm of a life lived in harmony with the turning of the world. The stars will slowly overhead. The wind moves across the snow. The ice cracks and shifts. The seals swim beneath the surface. The birds begin their long journey north. And you sleep on, through the night, through the darkness, held by the land, warmed by the hides, surrounded by your people, carried by the stories, trusting in the light, resting in the knowledge that morning will come, that the sun will rise, that the world will continue, and that you will wake when it is time to wake, and sleep when it is time to sleep, and live when it is time to live, in the way your ancestors have always lived, with patience and care and attention and gratitude through all the seasons, through all the darkness, through all the light. The night holds you gently. The darkness is not empty but full, filled with breath and warmth and presence, with memory and hope and continuity. You are not alone. You have never been alone. You are part of the circle that has no beginning and no end, the great unbroken circle of survival and adaptation, of endurance and renewal, of sleeping and waking, of darkness and light. And in this knowing, you rest completely, your body still, your mind quiet, your heart at peace, sleeping through the endless polar night, carried by dreams, held by love, waiting for the light that will surely come, that always comes, that is already on its way, moving toward you across the frozen world, bringing with it the promise of another day, another season, another turn of the great wheel that holds us all. You sleep, and the world sleeps with you. And together, in the darkness, you wait for morning.